Okay, I'd like to call the, I'm looking up at the date and it says June 24th.
It's July 22nd.
July 22nd, 2024, Peachtree City Planning Commission meeting to order. If everyone would please rise and join me in pledging allegiance to the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I apologize. I have a lot of new things on the desk here that I have to maneuver around. We're going to start off. Any additions or deletions this evening?
Not to the agenda. Can you hear me? There it goes. Not to the agenda. I did want to mention that, we've got a couple of ordinances kind of on, I would say, our backlog, and we had originally thought that we would move on to the short-term rental very shortly. Depending on how your workshop goes tonight, I don't want to keep moving it further and further down the year, because we had wanted to get it to council sooner, actually originally during the summer. So that said, depending on how it goes tonight, we may want to consider adding it or having it on our next agenda, or at least in the second August meeting for public discussion on the short-term rental. I just want to keep it on your radar,
Okay.
is what I'm saying.
Okay, good. Any other announcements or reports? Nothing?
No, sir.
Okay. Approval of minutes. Hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to review the minutes from the June 24th meeting. Any additions, deletions, comments from anyone? No? Okay, that being said, we have a motion for approval of the minutes as submitted.
Mr. Chairman, I motion that we approve the June 24th Planning Commission minutes as submitted.
Okay, we have a motion for approval and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, minutes approved as submitted.
Okay, who's playing with the toys? Oh, is it your paper?
If it's green, sorry.
Okay.
I just found out you can't put papers on the screen either.
Okay.
So, and of course I put papers right back on the screen again. Let me get rid of that. Okay. We're going to go ahead and move on to the public hearing, which is the rezoning request from OI Office Institutional to GC General Commercial, 1999 and 2011 Highway 54 West. I'm going to go ahead and go over the public hearing procedures before we turn it over to staff. When a public hearing is open, members of the Planning Commission will become hearers. No action on their part is in order until the chairperson declares the hearing complete. The chairperson will allow each side equal opportunity to the floor. Individual members of the public will be given up to 5 minutes to state their case. First, city staff will present the request and provide an assessment of compliance with city code. Next, those supporting the issue will be heard, and that includes the applicant. Then, those opposing the issue will be heard. Prior to closing the public hearing, input portion of the meeting, city staff and the public will be given an opportunity to ask questions of either or both sides of the issue. When the chairperson is assured that the input is complete, the public hearing shall be ended, and the Planning Commission may then debate the issue and render a decision. All speakers from the public are asked to follow these rules. 1, come to the microphone and state your name and neighborhood prior to making remarks. 2, keep remarks under 5 minutes, and please do not repeat others' comments. And 3, address all comments to the chairperson. Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to staff.
All right, thank you. So this is the property that is requesting. It's currently 2 lots that have single-family homes that have been converted to office use. They were annexed into the city in I think about 2013. So that when they were originally developed, it was developed in the county. When it was annexed in, it was zoned OI conditional. and they are asking to rezone that to GC, general commercial. They have proposed a site plan that shows the development as a single lot for a car wash facility. However, the GC category allows many commercial, or all of the commercial uses. We only have one commercial district. This may look familiar. There was a similar request back in late 2023 that was heard by City Council in September. We do have a required 6-month waiting period when a project or a request is denied, and that waiting period has been satisfied. So as we mentioned, it is zoned OI with conditions. I've put a few of those conditions up here that apply to this property or this type of development in particular. One is that there should not be any vehicular access to Sumner Road. The other is that there should be a 25-foot undisturbed buffer along Sumner Road, and that the third one is that the property owner would be responsible for constructing a multi-use path connecting the intersection of 54 and Sumner somewhere in their property, but not within that 25-foot undisturbed buffer. So those some of these conditions get triggered when a project is redeveloped, and that multi-use path one is one of those. One of the things that we have to review for rezoning, those 6 criteria, and one of them is the conformance with the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan includes a overall vision as well as a future land use map. This property is located within what is called a village center, and you can see this dark black outline outlines the limits of what's considered this village center. And you can see how it consists mostly of commercial office and a little bit of mixed use and multifamily. So the overall concept for development in the comprehensive plan is what's called the village concept, and this graphic here is a very simplistic method of describing this step-down village center concept, where basically you would have your more intense uses like mixed use or commercial and office stepping down in intensity to residential, which it would then step down from like higher density residential all the way down to a rural residential. And then it would be connected all with our multi-use path system. And so when you look at the comprehensive plan, it lists all of the type of uses and zoning categories that may be appropriate, but the reason for the future land use map is to put this concept in real world, on the real existing conditions of the property. And so the reason that this property is zoned or is future land use is for office instead of commercial is because it is stepping down in intensity to what is actually a very low density residential across from Sumner Road. So for that reason, as you can see, the staff is not of the opinion that the request meets the majority of the rezoning requirements. However, if the Planning Commission were to recommend this approval to the City Council, we would like to have you consider keeping some of those conditions on the zoning, such as prohibiting vehicular access to Sumner Road from this development, as well as that 25-foot buffer along Sumner Road. The applicant does have a presentation to give tonight. If you could bring that up for us, Stephen, thank you. Yes, please. And I'm sorry, we didn't set up a...
Hey there, Planning Commissioners. Good to see you. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Stephen Jones. I'm here today on behalf of the applicant, and I'm with the law firm of Taylor English Duma. This project is a concept for a PhoneWorks car wash. What is a PhoneWorks car wash? Well, it's branded as an auto spa. That's different from a car wash because of the level of service that the car wash provides, the internal mechanics, the level of chemicals, 100% water reclamation, as well as the customer service that's provided. All of it's designed to be a top level of service that can service the top level of cars. They have a no scratch policy that just really caters and is indicative of the high level or the high caliber that this brand provides. So again, Class A, an auto spa, it's a more luxurious experience. And they take pride in what they do. They take pride in employing folks within their community. As Ms. Caillou noted, this is a 1.95 acre parcel, currently zoned O&I, and the proposed zoning is for GC. It consists of 2 parcels. One and 2, one is owned by the Paletta Group, the other Dr. Boast. These parcels came in, as Ms. Caillou said, in 2013 as an annexation from the unincorporated county. Since then, they have remained undeveloped as zoned. The owners are the ones that are currently occupying that. Why? Because there is no market as presently zoned. As Mr. Paletta has said before this board, I believe, in this commission, they have not received any offers for these properties during the entire time that they have owned them, except for uses which would require a rezoning. Therefore, the owners have been deprived, as presently zoned, of an economically viable use, which is demonstrated by the fact that they are having to occupy them themselves. So, to that end, the permitted uses as presently zoned are extremely limited, and they're limited to office and institutional uses. As we've all seen in the news and in the market, office and institutional uses, the market has plummeted. We've seen tons of suburban office go back to lenders. We've seen tons of suburban office be converted to multifamily and condos. The market for multifamily as it existed in 2013 and when similarly situated parcels were developed is much different. There is no economic market for office on this parcel. And some of those uses, if you'll see, include offices, professional services, clubs or lodges, funeral homes, public land, land for distribution of utility services, like a substation, professional facilities, banks, educational uses, and indoor sit-down restaurants with not more than 60 seats and not a drive-through. That's extremely limited. These limited uses are why the property owners have been unable to achieve an off-taker for their property, and they've been stuck with these properties for over a decade. Again, the economically viable use is an issue. If you look at the zoning map, you'll see that the O&I parcels, when they were annexed, are a substantial outlier in this area. As Ms. Caillou noted, up and down 54 are general commercial uses. And where there's not, it's LUC backing up to residential uses. So you'll see the vast trend in this village center is to GC. And what I think is quite telling about this parcel is it is almost completely surrounded by commercial uses that front on the highway. Here's the concept plan. Ms. Caillou is right. You did hear this shortly over 6 months ago. We're bringing it back before you because, again, there's no economically viable uses zoned except for a GC use, and particularly a car wash. Well, what we've tried to do with this zoning application is address some of the things that this board and the council said with the last application and try to incorporate them into the concept here, as well as address some of those concerns, as I will do later on. Principally, to Ms. Caillou's point, we have incorporated a 25-foot buffer along, and that's an updated concept plan that I don't know that made it into your agenda packet, but we've incorporated a 25-foot buffer, the maximum, and would consent to the condition that traveled with this parcel under the current zoning. So that would incorporate the same buffer along Sumner, as well as you'll also see the other staff recommended conditions incorporated, and then that's no access on Sumner. But I want to look at this parcel, and you see how the car wash fits on it. It takes both parcels to achieve an economically viable use. Together, they can get a nice product that fits with the commercial theme up and down Highway 54 as shown by the zoning map. Here's some renderings of the proposed facility. This is looking south, the prior was looking north. I want to look at some of, or all of, the factors that the ordinance sets forth for consideration of requests like these. First is whether the zoning proposal is in conformity with the policies and intent of the land plan. Well, the comp plan says that commercial uses are appropriate in a village center in which this is located. The O&I designation on the flume is just a reflection of its existing zoning. O&I, as you previously saw, is a spot zoning. It's almost completely surrounded by commercial uses. Number two, whether the zoning proposal will permit a use that is suitable in view of the use and development of adjacent and nearby properties. Again, we are almost surrounded by commercial uses, with one exception, one office use. And that office use is an outlier, and it's a vestige of a prior annexation and prior market conditions which no longer exist a decade later. Three, whether the zoning proposal will adversely affect the existing use or usability of adjacent or nearby properties. Again, no. The zoning is consistent with the zoning of properties in the immediate vicinity, and the applicant proposes and staff recommends conditions that will ameliorate any negative effects. Let's move to the next condition, the next criteria. Whether the property to be affected by the zoning proposal has a reasonable economic use as currently zoned. It doesn't. The property owners have been unable to dispose of these properties and been hindered with only being able to use them for their personal, professional uses because there were no off-takers. 5, whether the zoning proposal will result in a use which will or could cause an excessive or burdensome use on existing street, transportation facilities, utilities, or schools. It won't. Car wash uses do not impact schools. And this facility has 100% water reclamation. And finally, most car wash trips are passerby trips, and our market studies and data have shown that. The folks that use car washes are either traveling by or they live in the immediate vicinity. 6, whether there are other existing or changing conditions which affect the development and either support approval or denial. Again, I don't want to belabor the point, but office and institutional uses as a general use have suffered greatly after the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, we've seen tons of office, especially suburban office, go back to lenders. We've seen a ton of suburban office get converted to multifamily. Undeveloped, and that means that if the existing stock can't fill up, and if the existing stock is going back to the lender, there most certainly is not a market for new, fresh dirt for O&I. So now I want to talk about some concerns and some issues that we discussed with the last application and walk you through those. I can give you a detailed overview of other automotive wash uses in the vicinity, but what's important in telling here is along, if I can get my clicker to work, okay, we'll wing it. Along the 54 corridor, headed towards Fayetteville, there is not another automatic tunnel wash. There is one to the south of town, one to the west of town, one to the north. There is not one to the east. As you get to Fayetteville, there is one to the north of Fayetteville. There is not one between Fayetteville and Peachtree City. Why do you see them located the way they are? Well, that's the way the market works for car washes. Again, that goes back to it's a passerby use. It is not a destination use. It's a general market location situated near where the end user is either already traveling or where they reside. The last time we had some discussions about noise, and there were a lot of concerns about noise that the car wash would produce. Well, the only noise really generated by a car wash is the vacuum producers. You know, we've all been to a car wash and heard them. but Foamworks at this location proposes to use special equipment which reduces the noise down to the level between a normal conversation, which is if I was speaking without a microphone to you, and busy traffic on a street, like right in front of City Hall. That's in the 72 decibel level, between 60 decibels, which is a normal conversation, and 75 to 80, which is a busy street. Above that, 110 decibels is a car. A diesel truck accelerating is 100. A semi-truck is 100. A garbage truck is between 85 and 100. This is significantly less. But I want to show you some other noise dampening issues, components, which further ameliorate those issues. One is that the producer's in its own offset building. At this facility, we would actually propose to put it either inside or in its own standalone building, which is one of those that you see right here, which further reduces any noise which escapes from the producer. 2, we went and measured decibel levels existing on the property, and you'll see at the intersection of Sumner and 54, the average was 77 decibels. Further up Sumner at Wilburn, the average decibels was 63. On site, right where that clouded area is, the average decibel were 77. That's road noise, that's undeveloped. And you'll see it was taken at peak times. So what do decibels mean, right? So if you double the distance away, decibels reduced by 6. Decibels are not a linear function, it's a exponential function. So if I'm 15 feet away from the producer, which is where that data was measured by the manufacturer, 72 decibels. If I get to 30, it steps down 6 to 64. If I get to 60, it's 58. If I get to 120, it's 52. That's less than a normal conversation. So if I'm 120 feet away from it and it's not in an enclosure, it still sounds like a normal conversation. You can see it's a little small there, but you'll see that from approximately where the enclosure would be to Sumner Road is less than that. So you're still on the subject property, and even without the enclosure, it would sound like a normal conversation. We'll put it in an enclosure and then put a double row of evergreens like we proposed, 25 foot thick, with a privacy fence. That's a heck of a mitigation. Also, you have ordinances on the books for the city which control and regulate noise. From a single family residence, the decibel level during the day cannot exceed 65 decibels. At night, it can't exceed 60. Well, we know we're going to be well below that. We're going to be on our property, even without the enclosure, it would sound like a normal conversation. We'll put it in an enclosure, and it further reduces it. And your neurozoid sets out times in which excessive noises are prohibited. I want to talk about lighting now. There were some concerns with the last application about lighting of this facility. First and foremost, you will have that double row of evergreens screening this from Sumner Road, with the only visibility then being from 54. But we would use, and I'll get to this next point, but we would propose using night sky friendly lights, which is what you see on the right side of your screen. That's shielded down, there's no light pollution outwards. What a lot of us think about otherwise is when you go to a big box retailer and you see the thing on the left, where the whole sky is lit up, right? But that's not what the city's lighting ordinance requires. The city's lighting ordinance requires, and we would, even without the ordinance, implement this, shoebox style cutoff fixtures that make it so that the light is not directed off-site and that the light source is shielded from direct off-site viewing. Finally, all light fixtures should be fully shielded with light angle cutouts so as to eliminate uplifting, spill lighting, and glare. Again, let's go back. That's on the right. On the left is everything your ordinance is designed to prevent. On the right is what your ordinance seeks. So that's the Foamworks proposal. That's this application. Again, We're here today not just for Foamworks, not just for the applicant, but for these two property owners, the Paletta Group and Dr. Post, who have not been able to dispose of their property because the O&I use is just not economically viable. Again, not to beat a dead horse, but the office market, especially the suburban office market, is obliterated after COVID. These owners do not have an economically viable uses zoned. That's why we would ask you to follow the development trend in the area, as well as your zoning map, which shows a zoning trend in almost all the way around us of commercial uses. And when you approve it, we would consent to and ask you to adopt, because that's what Foamworks wants to do, is the right thing, ask you to adopt staff's recommended conditions, which would ameliorate some of those negative effects that we've been through. I do thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. If you have any questions, I know you typically ask those later, but if I can answer any that have come up at this moment, I'd be more than happy to answer them, or any that you may have after the public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do we have anyone else that would like to speak in favor? Okay. Go ahead and switch over now. Do we have anyone who would like to speak in opposition? If so, if you would please state your name and where you live.
Hi, everyone. My name is Regina Pitstick. I live on Wellborn Road, which would be one lot away from this proposed property change. When the same requests came before the Planning Commission and City Council less than a year ago, it was unanimously denied, both by the Planning Commission and City Council. And to my knowledge, nothing has changed with regard to the rezoning evaluation criteria since this last request. So I'm a little bit puzzled as to why we're here again. Nonetheless, I'll get right to it. So my family and I relocated from out of state to Peachtree City about 3 years ago. And we were specifically looking for a property with a big yard for our dogs and our kids. We wanted to put in a pool, which we since have. And we're looking for the perfect place, and we found that on Wellborn Road. It's a dead-end street. There's 7 houses on that street. There's no one across the street from us. It's very secluded and quiet. Commonly deer in my front yard eating the roses. And the thought of putting an auto spa or car wash 1 house away from me, I can't even fathom. I know the proposal is not in compliance with the step-down plan and the land use model, and there's obviously a reason for that. I know the applicant feels that he's surrounded by GC, but 100% of the property behind him is all residential neighborhood. There will be additional traffic and there will be noise, and I appreciate the fact that they did the research on the noise pollution and the light pollution, because those are definitely things that came up last time, and I am still concerned about them. The property values, I mean, the applicant states that the rezoning in their submission would increase the value of the adjacent commercial properties, but studies have shown that the opposite can be true, especially in residential areas. The constant noise, traffic, and light pollution can deter homeowners and decrease property values. Now, while I can appreciate and empathize with the situation the applicants are in, I mean, I've been there myself. I've lost my butt on real estate before. And unfortunately, nobody was there to bail me out. So from a financial perspective, I completely get it. But building a strong community requires careful planning and consideration for all residents as well as the environment. So I just want to leave you with that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Anyone else opposing?
Yeah, my name's Frida Lyles. I live on 103 Sumner Place Court, which is like Regina, 2 houses away or 2 from it. Like Regina, we bought our home 4 years ago. We were looking for the same thing. We put a pool in the backyard, looking for woods in our backyard. We see deer constantly when we walk our dogs. You know, the privacy is just so well there. One thing I do have to say about the traffic, if you've ever been coming to the stoplight there with Sumner meets 54, that traffic, people coming into Peachtree City, they are flying. If you don't stop at that stoplight, and even when that light turns green, you gotta watch it, because people run the stoplight. So they're planning on putting a car wash there. That's just gonna create accidents for people that people just don't know it's there. The other thing is, you got lots of kids going with golf carts down that road on Sumner. You increase that traffic. Granted, they're not gonna have a roadway going into Sumner, but it's just gonna increase that traffic immensely. It's gonna impact our kids and safety. Like them, like Regina, I bought real estate too. I've lost money. Nobody was there to bail me out either. Not trying to duplicate, but just to let people know. People have made bad investments. I've made bad investments in the stock market. It just happens, you know? Sometimes that's the way the ball rolls. So again, I wanna thank you for your time. Again, like Regina, I'm baffled that this is still here, that we have to come and oppose this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, you can.
Hi, I'm Mr. Chairman. I'm Joe Bolden. I live at 102 Sumner Place Court, the second house on the right, as you first turn into Sumner Place Court. My wife and I bought that property and moved in 2006, so we've been there quite a while. What I would like to do is take a little different approach and talk about the points that Mr. Jones brought up specifically. First thing he pointed out was the high quality of the car wash. That may be valid, but it's not valid in terms of making this change. There are a lot of other businesses that could be high value. I don't think that is even a consideration. I don't know why he brought it up. And he mentioned there's no market for OI property there. I don't know that that's true. I think what is true maybe is there's not as much return on investment for that particular zoning because of the unique shape of that property. But he knew that when the property was purchased. I don't think that's reason enough justification now for changing the zoning. He mentioned that they've been stuck with the property for 10 years. That was a positive point he wanted to bring up. Well, he knew that zoning when he bought the property. I too have been owner of property and taken quite a risk. Probably shouldn't have. The argument that it wouldn't increase the traffic there, I think, is not valid. I go in and out of there every day. Going west on 54, there is a turnout lane by that property to get onto Sumner Road. That definitely, the car wash will definitely increase the traffic on that turnout, which will back up traffic. And there's no place, unless you're gonna make up the turnout lane longer, it's gonna block the traffic. So I think that's an invalid argument. The noise, he may have a point there, but I go through a car wash quite frequently, and there is additional noise. His argument of comparing the noise to a truck is irrelevant because the trucks are already there. Whatever noise they produce is going to be in addition to the truck and traffic noise that's already there. So that's not a valid argument. His argument that it will not affect the OI property values, I don't think is valid because this will increase traffic. It's a different zoning, and it probably will affect the OI property values. I know it will affect my property value. Most of the homes on that street are in the $1 million value. The last issue was his argument that that whole area is surrounded by GC zoning. Well, that may be true, but what's there now is somewhat of a buffer for that GC zoning. And he's removing that buffer with respect to the OI property there and the residential property there. So I think the primary reason, as I listen to Mr. Jones, is that there is a greater return on investment for this property zoned as GC rather than OI. I see no other valid reason to change this zoning. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hey, good evening. My name's Ryan Holmes. I live at 101 Sumner Place Court, which is directly across the street from the proposed rezoning. And I won't reiterate the points that have already been shared. I just want to mention a couple of things. One, so when we purchased our property, we purchased it under the assumption that that property there was zoned as office and not general commercial, just like years ago when the current owners of that property purchased the property. It was under the assumption that it was zoned as such, not as general commercial. And so for that to change, would feel like the rug was being pulled out from under us when we had purchased our home, expecting that to remain as office space. I've got 3 boys. 2 of my boys are on the autism spectrum, which I'm not sure how much you know about that, but sensory sensitivities, especially to sound, is something that's pretty common with kids on the autism spectrum. So my youngest son, at family gatherings, will actually either not come downstairs or put on sound canceling headphones because the sound just bothers him a lot. And so to have a car wash with 20 plus vacuums directly across the street, that's certainly not what we had in mind when we chose to move there. And while I can appreciate the efforts to reduce the sound impact, a busy street that's a lot of sound. And to move that from the other side of that property from where 54 is, closer, directly across the street, across a 2-lane street from our home, that's certainly not what we had planned on when we chose to purchase that property and have our residence there. And so I'm pretty concerned about the potential for sound impacts and property values and a lot of the things, the other things that people have already mentioned, but I just wanted to share those 2 additional things, so thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Iris Salzman. I live at 105 Sumner Place Court. We've been here for 18 years. We've loved and appreciated Peachtree City and how the council and you have looked at issues and have protected us. And we're asking you to consider that tonight. We're really, as you know, we're all upset about it. To talk about residential next to this commercial property is just outrageous. And when you talk about high in density and then going out, and we're in the beige zone, I don't know if you'd call this red, but it certainly isn't beige or brown. And the fact that this machinery will be used all day, even though we have commercial area down 54, none of those properties are producing a sound all day long. And as far as the traffic is concerned, it's true, we have trucks that make noise, but it's not there constantly. It comes through our area and continues, whether it's going to Noonan or whether it's going to Fayetteville. So the concern is valid for all of us that live in these beautiful homes, and we ask you to protect them.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, Dominic Scalamani. I live on 109 Sumner Place Court, kind of midway on the street there. So I think I echo all of the opinions stated. Obviously, I'm totally against this proposal. I think the situation here is an economic situation where you have 2 owners that are stuck with property that they can't get rid of. So possibly and a famous scientist with crazy hair in the past said that insanity is the definition of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So, 6 months ago, this was proposed, it was shut down, just as it should have been, and now it's back on the dockets again. But in order to come to a compromise, one thing that the Peachtree City can consider is just to purchase this land from these owners so that they can achieve some type of economic compromise to their situation and then develop that as a green space, construct a cart path that, we don't want to have a fatality on that road. I work down at Fayette as an orthopedic surgeon. We don't want to see somebody coming to our hospital who was struck, by a motor vehicle and a golf cart, and we know that road needs a cart path. It's essential. So it would be a great investment for the city to purchase this land. It would satisfy the owners and put money in their pockets. The car wash can secure land it's full of land down on 54 between here and Fayette Hospital. So if they want to buy a piece of land and make a car wash further away from residential areas, there's tons of opportunities on that road. So I think that would be a win-win situation for everybody and finally put this situation to rest. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Sarah O'Neill. I'm at 113 Sumner Place Court. I was going to say the same thing that Dominic did, but what I want to add to that is there are everybody, all of the kids on that side of Smoke Rise, and then all of the communities, including ours, going every morning to McIntosh and coming home on the golf cart and other schools. They all use Sumner Road because there's no golf cart path and cars fly down there's no sidewalk, there's no golf cart path. There are hundreds of people on that road, literally having to walk on the road every single day because people going to school, walking their dogs, just going for a walk or a run. I struggle with it with my 2 babies in the stroller. It's just a safety issue. And I was also going to propose, why doesn't the city purchase this land, alleviate the owners from their current situation, do something great for the community for I'm thinking about my kids going to school in the future. It's really unsafe, and there's so many people, I would say hundreds of people every day use it, like this road, because and Smoke Rise is a huge community. Way on the other side of Smoke Rise is North Peachtree Parkway, up by like the Kedron Shopping Center. I mean, a lot of Smoke Rise have to use Sumner Road to get in and out of their house, whether they're using a car, golf cart, or walking. So it's the main road for a lot of people. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, please?
Hello, my name is John Pitstick. Like Regina, I live at 103 Wellborn. I agree with everything said so far. I would just like to add something on the economic viability aspect of this. I think, we live in a free market, supply and demand. I've been burnt by it, I'm sure everyone has. But I'd just like to say something back to this committee that you said, whatever it was, 7 months ago, 8 months ago, which was encouraging the owners to be creative. I think the juicery that was added was used as an example next to the office space, the Piedmont offices. So that's one idea. I'll just share another one. I actually work remotely for a technology company, and recently was trying to have some meetings nearby, and I needed office space to rent. And guess what I couldn't find? Office space to rent in Peachtree City. There's a website, check it out if you like, liquidspace.com, provides this service. It's a growing service. I would say some feedback to owners stuck in this situation is think technology, think future. There's options out there. It's like Airbnb for renting office space. There's one option in all of Peachtree City. We had to go up by the airport. You can imagine that's not great. That's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Chris Reynolds, 103 Sumner Place Court. I agree with everything everybody said on here. One thing is the residential market is not very good right now, okay? And we're not asking the Planning Commission to do things to help us sell our houses. It's just going to be the way it is, whether we're able to sell our house the way the market is, and that's what everybody should be held to. Another thing too, just to reiterate the traffic situation, Sumner Road intersecting 54, 55 miles an hour. 55 miles an hour. When I go out and take a right off of Sumner onto 54 going east, I look very carefully to see how far those cars are back. how far they're back, because I've got an intersection there. I have a traffic light. There's no traffic light where they're gonna let people out into the turning lane, and also they're gonna try to get on the road. People going 55 miles an hour are gonna have a hard time slowing down and not causing accidents. That's a major safety problem. Third thing, just the last thing, is everybody knows 5474 area is congested. It's a traffic problem. Everybody's trying to do whatever they can about it, but the problem is they stuffed everything in that area, and they keep stuffing more things in there. They just stuffed the car wash in there off Huddleston Road. So do you want to create a situation where you have Publix, you have all the Ace Hardware, you have all this commercial on the other side of the road? You want to stuff something else in here too and create another traffic problem area for Peachtree City? And I know the Planning Commission, I agree 100% that this doesn't meet your criteria in a lot of ways, and I applaud you for the 5-0 vote last time, and I applaud you for looking at it very closely this time. I appreciate the presentation, but it's not in the good interest of the city, only for the people selling and buying, and that's it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak in opposition? Yes.
My name is Amanda Holmes. I live at 109 Wellborn Road, and I agree with every single one of my neighbors that have been up to speak this evening. I think everybody had all of the points that we need. The only thing that I didn't hear tonight that we spoke about the last time we were here 6 months ago was the impact that it's going to have on the community as far as jobs or bringing anything that actually is valuable to Peachtree City other than a car wash for Lamborghinis, because we've all seen so many Lamborghinis in the city. It's not really going to bring a whole lot of jobs to us. It sounds like everybody's going to have to make a whole lot of compensations to be able to put the auto spa in, and we're maybe going to employ 3 or 4 people a day. All of our houses are going to probably see some kind of just issues if we're trying to sell or have any interest in the residential side. So again, thanks for thinking about it, and I hope that you guys agree with the votes you had last time. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? No, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. Again, if you have any questions, please address those to me, and then we'll go ahead and get those answered either by staff or by the applicant or someone else. So any questions anyone would like to ask? Yes, please come up to the microphone if you would.
So this is the second time we've done this in about 8 months. Is it an automatic thing where they can just continue to do this on infinitum? And not just them, but
Yeah.
anybody?
Yeah, it's a constitutionally protected right
Okay.
to
Okay, just
petition
wondering.
your government. Yes, sir.
And you don't have any, you have to then listen to it and have a forum like this? Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Yes.
Dominic from 109 Sumner. I'm not sure if the other residents have the same experience that I do with the water pressure. So, you know, and this is another situation. So if in times of drought and when everybody is watering their, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it's true. We have some witnesses here. When everybody's watering their lawns in the morning and you go to take a shower on Sumner Place Court, the water pressure is almost down to 0. And so that's another consideration. I don't know if the company's done a hydraulic, a study on that. You know, how much more water do we want to take out of our houses back there? Because we have an issue where we can barely take a shower in the morning especially if you wake up early like I do, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, there's no water. And does everybody have that same experience? Okay, well, there you go. I got some witnesses.
And Rob and I.
So the water's provided by the county, so I don't have the expertise. I do know that they have to meet pressure tests, specifically for for a fire sprinkler system. which means that they would be required to make any kind of size upgrades. But as far as engineering and even if this property would be tied to the same water line that the residentials are served, I don't even know that answer. I'm sorry.
Any other questions?
I think I recall the answer from last time, but just want to inquire what the hours of service and days of service for the facility would be.
Mr. Jones, would you be able to answer that?
Yes, generally Foamworks are open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., shorter hours on Sunday, depending on the location and the market demand typically.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing that there are no additional questions, I'm going to go ahead and close the public portion of the public hearing. Go ahead and turn it over to the commission. Going to go ahead and start with Commissioner Kriz. We'll go ahead and do questions first. Okay. Commissioner Hamner?
Yeah, I have a few questions for the applicant. First of all, I'm going to break our rule. I'm going to make a very quick comment. Thank you for providing additional information based on the last time we talked about this property. It's good to see, of course, like the noise information and all that, so appreciate that. But obviously, there's still a lot of concerns that we've heard tonight on this. You know, very similar concerns to what we heard 6 months ago. Again, hearing those concerns yet again. My question is, between the last time this was presented to now, has there been any sort of outreach in terms of addressing the neighborhood or any of the specific concerns with the individuals who are here tonight and live in that neighborhood?
Yeah, certainly. So what we did is we took all the comments that were made at the last two public hearings, we tried to aggregate them, and we tried to address them all in these presentations. We heard specifically traffic, noise, lighting, some of the same concerns that you heard tonight. We felt that we thoroughly addressed the noise issue. The noise off of our site, as shown by some of the data that we've collected and presented, would be de minimis compared to the other noise in the surrounding area and would not increase. And I saw you shaking your head when we were talking about the exponential factor and the fact that before you get off of our property, while you're still on the property, it sounds like an average voice. So we felt that we really did our best to address that concern and allay the fear based on that. We understand. That's why we went through substantial efforts to really bring the full picture back. We heard the lighting. We felt that we really addressed that. And then as well as the traffic as well. You know, we're following staff's recommended conditions to keep traffic off Sumner. And again, based on Foamworks' experience in the market, this is a passerby use. It's not it's not a generative use. It's not a destination use. So we felt that we've done a lot to try to at least address that concern. And again, we don't have access onto Sumner. And as you've got folks passing by, I mean, our average user, the only way that they'll be really typically using Sumner is if they're already traveling that. I mean, that's just what we see in terms of, you know, zip codes with memberships and, you know, people frequenting, and it's just the nature of the business.
Sure.
Which is why you see them located geographically the way you do.
Understood. And I think that's reflected in, of course, the presentation today in terms of trying to answer some of those questions, to provide additional information for that. And this is not a requirement or anything like that, but outside of the presentations, has there been any other sort of proactive communication to the residents of the adjoining properties?
No, but we'd be happy to have a town hall and try to address some of those concerns. But, you know, again, I hear them. If there's additional or new concerns, we'd love to address them. I mean, Foamworks likes to be a member of the community in every community in which it has a wash. There was one comment about, you know, jobs and employing people. You know, Foamworks has about a dozen folks, give or take, you know, where the location is, and they generally all come from the surrounding areas. We might import somebody from another store to be a team leader, to train a new team leader, but we don't have commuters from Macon or Duluth or something like that. So that's another positive impact.
Understood. Second question for you. You know, you talked a lot about, of course, the property and the way how the current owners are trying to monetize it and the limited opportunities that are available for it, which is why we're talking about the car wash. Has there been, are you aware of, and if you are, can you summarize some of the efforts that have been made to bring in businesses that would meet with the current OIC zoning in order to monetize that?
The current O&I, yes, Commissioner. So it is used as a real estate brokerage office, and my understanding has been marketed for a number of years. And I believe in the prior hearings, Mr. Paletta spoke, testify might not be the best word, but gave his statement that the only offers he's had are automotive style uses, particularly car washes. So he's been actively marketing this property and has been relegated to using it as his office so that he can use it for something. And to go back to one of the zoning factors, you know, you had some people say, well, I've made bad housing purchases. Well, a house still has an economically viable use. Yes, you might have bought it for X and now it's worth 75% of that, right? We all buy at the height of the market. Well, the Constitution guarantees the property owner is an economically viable use. So you've got an existing developed residence that's zoned O&I. The owner has been trying to dispose of it for almost a decade, and there have been no takers as currently zoned. That means the market has dictated that there's no economically viable use. To put that in comparison to a house, if I had, well, for instance, one of these houses on the subject property, and it was still zoned for residential use, and I put it on the market, and everybody came to me and said, well, I want to buy it for a single family home. I said, well, you can't, it's presently zoned. Or the converse, I want to use it as a single family home. Well, you can't because it's O&I. That's the difference. It's not about economic value, it's about, is there a use versus is there no use? So I think that's the relative distinction there.
Got it. Just to repeat back, just so I understand this point that you made a moment ago. It seems like, again, you know, there's been an effort to try and sell the property or for about a decade on this point. But there has been at least some conversations and maybe some offers on it, and they just haven't been accepted by the seller. Is that correct?
Because they would all have required a rezoning such as
They would
this.
all require rezoning.
Which makes that distinction. The question asked by your zoning ordinance and by state law and federal constitutional law is whether the property as presently zoned has an economically viable use.
Got it.
And that is one way to dictate and show that, and one thing that we look at when we're assessing that is the market. And if the market's only bringing you things that say it's got to be rezoned before I buy it as a purchaser, well, then that's saying that the present zoning does not afford a constitutional use. It goes back to that analogy as if these houses were still zoned for residential and everyone who came to them wanted to use them for office. Here, you've got them zoned for office, and everybody that's coming to them wants to use them for a general commercial use. It's showing that the market says, no dice. And that's why we're back petitioning the city for a rezoning so that the owners can have an economically viable use. And, you know, another thing is it's as zoned. So you have to also look at the GC component as well. You know, you're comparing O&I to GC, not just office to car wash, which is also a distinction that I think is important from the way the law looks at it.
Okay. Just to make sure I totally understand and just to confirm, it's only been GC companies and businesses that have approached it, and it seems like it's car related, is that correct?
That's our understanding, yes, Commissioner.
Okay. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Commissioner Leota?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on a few of those questions we just heard. Of the other uses that are in the GC zone, has the owner been approached by uses that would not be sound-producing uses, such as a retail store or some other use that's permitted in GC?
My understanding is no. I believe what he said at the last hearing was that his uses were limited to uses such as this of an automotive nature. And to that point of a development trend in related zoning, there are two automotive uses almost directly across the street from this. So you do have a development and a zoning trend towards an automotive hub of, you know, wheels-based services.
So there haven't been any other general commercial, retail type businesses that have approached the property owner?
Based on my prior conversations with the owner, that's correct. I'm
Um,
not in his head, right, but.
That's okay. Could we put your noise information slides back up?
Oh, yeah, I don't have.
So, yeah, so this slide and the next slide, I think it was, that you showed some distances and diminishing levels of noise generation.
Correct.
Where did that information come from? Who generated that information?
This was scientifically available information based on the function of decibel reduction over distance. And so my understanding is that rule at the very top, that double the distance equals 6 decibel reduction in sound.
So did the applicant hire a sound expert to generate this information?
No, this is publicly available information as to how sound steps down.
I understand. Do you know if the sound increases? Does the sound generated by the site add to the existing site-generated noise or highway-generated noise?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Do you mean, does it like,
Is it cumulative? Does it add?
I don't believe so, but
But we don't know.
I'm not a sound expert, but what I can tell you is that these are the decibel readings currently on the site as undeveloped and unused, and around the site, or at the location where the vacuums will exist, the decibel level on site already exceeds that which would be produced by the vacuums.
Right, so my question is, will the noise of the vacuums add and increase the decibel level of the ambient noise?
Well, it will from that point, but remember, the sound that started further away will continue to diminish as well. So
Understood.
it will and it won't. And so the best part to do, in my opinion, is to look at the new sound generation, because that's going to be what impacts further down or across Sumner Road.
Understand. So,
Well, I think our public comments time is over.
Yeah. We're in question, I'm
The-
sorry.
the 77 decibel 88 peak numbers that you have on the exhibit, that represents that area near where the vacuum generating equipment is? Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay. So what about it looks like 20 plus stalls where the vacuum hoses will be? What about the sound coming from the vacuum hoses?
So the real sound produced by these is the generator itself. That is the loudest thing produced. So that's what you measure, and that's what we've historically looked at when we try to mitigate sound on sites such as this. And I do also want to point out that vegetation as well as fences have a mitigating factor. A lot of times, for instance, at even an industrial site, you'll see a double staggered row of evergreens, which have been shown to act as a buffer to help further diminish the sound as it travels. So, addressing what Ms. Caillou said, if you look at the new sound generated, that step down that we looked at does not assume that there's anything intervening. And vegetation has been shown in development, I think it's pretty readily or commonly accepted, that vegetation, in addition to being a visual screen, is a auditory screen.
It is visual, but I'm going to disagree with you that it has been shown that vegetation does not mitigate sound. Only solid structures do. So I appreciate that information, though. I have a couple of traffic questions. The way that the cars are entering the site, and they're gonna queue up to, looks like some kind of a station where they will pay for the car wash and then go through the car wash system and the site and whatnot. Has there been any traffic study to help you generate the site plan to show that cars will not queue back out onto the highway?
So what we do is, and what we've done for this application is a trip generation memo that shows how many trips are coming in. And then also, that is the reason that you have the pay stall all the way here, is just based on experience and the traffic engineer's manual about how many trips this is anticipated to generate on average, during a peak hour or a peak AM hour. And that's one of the reasons why the engineer who has designed the vast majority of PhoneWorks sites put the queue in the shape and in the position that it is.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any other questions at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Leota. I don't have any questions that the other commissioners have not asked. I'm going to go ahead and move that over to comments. I'm going to start with Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you. Well, first I want to thank our neighbors for coming out today. I think public comment is an important part of our process, so I appreciate your comments. My opinions haven't changed on what this represents to this community and where it is. I agree with staff. It just does not, in my mind, meet the factors that are outlined when we consider a rezoning. So I am not in favor of this.
Commissioner Hamner?
All right. First of all, to PhoneWorks, and I said last time, really like you guys. I think you guys offer a great service, and I always love seeing commercial within the city. But my opinions from last time are the same, and my thoughts on this rezoning request are the same as it was 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I made 3 points, and I'm going to recap them again real quick. Number one, about does this fit the village concept? I know that the applicant is saying it does. I just fundamentally disagree with that in terms of the way that step down should work, et cetera, for that. So I do not believe that this fits our village concept. Number two, Article 1304. I appreciate the applicant going through that article in detail and answering some of those specific questions. One thing that I brought up last time that I didn't really see address outside of the noise numbers and some of the lighting is still that section D3, which says that we have to consider when a rezoning happens how it's going to affect the adjacent uses and the owners of the other properties. Obviously, there's still a lot of concerns around that I still have. I would agree with some of the comments that were made from the residents in terms of how this will impact those lives and the people that live in those properties there. I just fundamentally still believe that even though some of the numbers that are put out may be able to not impact those areas, I'm still just not totally sold that that is going to not impact those that are living close to where this rezoning is being proposed. And then finally, I just want to reiterate again, the current zoning right now, I understand, is problematic for the owners that currently own that own these properties and are seeking this. But again, there has been creativity that's been put to make these rezoning, the current zoning work for us right now. Again, I'm going to bring up the juicery like I did 6 months ago, and that was a business that was brought in, was able to make the zoning work for that. Again, it was good to hear, of course, that the history and getting a little bit more on that, but again, it's been proven that this has been able to work for that current zoning right now, the property that's right next to it. So again, I appreciate PhoneWorks. Again, I think you guys have a really great business, but this is just not the. I strongly recommend that we do not accept or recommend the zoning request, and given everything that we've seen from this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Leota?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, thank you for the public coming out. It's very important for us to hear what you have to say about your neighborhoods and how things may or may not affect you. I appreciate that greatly. I also appreciate Mr. Jones for submitting and presenting an application that has attempted to address some of the prior questions and concerns that we had on the previous application. Now, in terms of my thoughts on this application, if we could go back to the staff memo and just put up the evaluation criteria, there's 6 of them. I just have a few comments about each one. So the first one is whether the zoning is in conformity with the policy and intent of the land use plan. Generally, I think a rezoning of this property, because of the problems that have, the economic problems to the property owner that have occurred because of the current zoning, generally I think the general commercial rezoning could work if it were something that was not of the type that would affect the neighbors and that would affect the residential properties. And that was the root of some of my questions about whether other uses may have approached the owner and could be potentially inserted into this property and be an economically viable property and still meet some of the existing GC uses that would be permitted and not impact the neighbors. The second one is the zoning, whether the zoning proposal will permit a use that is suitable in view of the use and development of adjacent and nearby properties. I think the use could be compatible if it was something other than a noise generating type of business like a fast food restaurant or a car wash or something like that that could negatively impact the residents. 3 is whether the zoning proposal will adversely affect the existing use or usability of adjacent and nearby property. The car wash may adversely affect the residents based on noise and some of the issues that were discussed. I think there could be more information supplied relative to the noise issue that could support the applicant's presentation, but I'm not sure we're seeing enough information that would put me over the top in terms of no negative impact to the residents. Item 4, whether the property to be affected by the zoning proposal has a reasonable economic use as currently zoned. It certainly sounds like it doesn't as currently zoned, but I think it could with some of the other benign uses that are permitted in GC if that was a consideration, but that's not what's being proposed. 5 is whether the zoning will result in a use which will or could cause excessive or burdensome use on existing streets, transportation. They did answer that question relative to whether it would affect 54. I don't think this use would negatively affect the residential zone with respect to the traffic on and off the site, but I haven't really seen anything in the presentation that the queue would not back up onto the highway and cause a safety issue. And the last one is whether there are other existing or changing conditions affecting the use and development of the property which give supportive grounds for either approval or disapproval of the zoning proposal. I think the need to protect the single-family zone adjacent to this property is paramount, and that the current zoning was put there for that reason. And a change in the zoning to allow a different kind of use that is non-nuisance generating type use, I think would be something to be considered, but I don't happen to believe the car wash is one of those.
Thank you, Mr. Leota. Robin, I have a question for staff, and I just want to confirm this. So, OI, dentist office, doctor's office,
Drive-through bank or bank, any kind of, in fact, a small sit-down restaurant with fewer than 60
I believe it's 60,
spaces,
correct?
which is why the juicery is available.
And we've had, just over the past probably 6 months, and even prior to that, you know, we've had several new medical. I mean, we looked at the new dentist office, we looked at the new chiropractic's office, the new, I guess, pharmacy. I don't know what the acreage, I can't recall what the acreage were for each one of those.
Yeah, for a medical, you'd want, ideally, you'd want an acre and a half. Now, I know that this is 1.9, but we really need to consider the developability of the triangle portion.
Right.
And should that really be calculated in it? So, you know, an acre and a half. In fact, we have one of the narrowest properties in the city on the south side being proposed for drive-through bank that would be a use approvable in the OI district.
So the way I look at it, there are other uses that are possible. I think it takes a bit more creativity to take a look at those. I think it's very short-sighted to say, and maybe it is the case, but I look at the other, again, just offices, medical offices going in, and one of the comments from the applicant was, well, no one wants to go ahead and do anything. The only thing that wants to go there is automotive related. And it is a very unusual and maybe difficult buildable parcel. Unfortunately, that's a lot of what we have left in Peachtree City, hence why they've been sitting around for a while. But I think there are some really good architects and land planners out there that could get very creative if somebody would want to go ahead and do that. Just as the other commissioners mentioned, I see more information presented this time than what we saw last, but I really don't see anything different when it really comes down to the issues that we had from not only the commissioners, but also the public. And again, just as the other commissioners said, thank you all for coming this evening. This is a important part of you being in the community and being involved in your city and your area. And thank you for coming. I still have concerns with this. I think there are other uses for that parcel. I don't like, and I think somebody mentioned it, and maybe it was me in the last one, that it's really shoehorned in there. I agree with Commissioner Leota on the noise, more so than the traffic. And I think there are some opportunities for someone to get creative to go ahead and put something else there other than a car wash. And, you know, I look at the Take 5, I believe, going in Tyrone. I look at the Caliber car wash that was put off of Huddleston. And I'm not going to speak to the economic viability of any of those. But I think at least one of those are in a very difficult position. And I see this being very similar to that in many ways. So that's really everything I have to say. I'm going to go ahead and look to my fellow commissioners for, unless there's any other comments or questions, I'm going to look for a motion for recommendation. And I have to look to my right.
I move to recommend denial of the request, this rezoning request from OI Office Industrial to GC General Commercial, 1999 and 2011, Highway 54 West.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion to recommend denial for the rezoning. We have a second. Any other comments or questions? Okay, that being said, all those in favor of the recommendation for denial signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Recommendation to council for rezoning denial. Thank you. Okay, any old agenda items? Nothing. Okay, new agenda, we have the landscape plan, Bridge Park Medical, 2035 Commerce Drive. Gonna turn that over to staff.
All right. Can you hear me? Yes. Before we start, I'm going to make sure this works. Okay, yep. All right, so the developer has come to us with a landscape plan for the Bridge Park Medical Office. The site is located at 2035 Commerce Drive, next to, see, the McAllister's Deli is right here. Site is right next door. Something I do want to point out about this, let's go on to the site plan. Or not. There we go. All right. You know, our usual buffer along Highway 74 and, you know, the major thoroughfares is 60 feet, but this buffer in this office park was platted at 30 feet, so I just want to bring that to your attention. So the impervious area on this site was 44,027 square feet. That brings the requirement for their caliper inches to 132 inches of canopy trees, 88 inches of understory trees. And they are requesting to use tree fund alternative compliance for a portion of the requirement. And just as a reminder, the tree fund alternative compliance option is available only after, excuse me, all of the canopy and understory trees that can be reasonably planted on the site have been provided, and then at that point, no more than 50% of the required caliper inches can be met using this alternative method. So they have provided almost everything. Let's see, they have provided 100% of the understory trees and 70% of the canopy trees. So let's look at those real quick. One thing I did want to mention, there was a condition of the conceptual site plan approval that the stormwater pond, which is located right here, for the perimeter of the pond to be planted with evergreen landscaping. And so they have provided a mix of evergreen trees to meet this requirement. And those species include, well, you can see down here at the bottom, these are all of they have quite a selection of evergreen trees that are provided throughout the site. And as you can see with my color coding, it's all these sort of greens and blues, and that's what's surrounding the pond here, with a few little things added in. There is a red bud here and a couple of maples, but for the most part everything is evergreen. And then again we've got the red bud, which, you know, has a little bit of purple blooms in the spring, and then we've got the oak, maple, and elm with some fall color scattered throughout. It is staff's opinion that they have planted this as much as possible. I will point out that, let's see, so also, just a reminder, there is a hotel up here, and they have provided as much buffer as possible. There's they've got some evergreens mixed in with the hardwoods. And I will point out there is quite a bit of utilities happening up in this area, so they provided as much as possible trees up here that they can. And there are quite a few trees on the hotel property too. It was a little sparse over here, that's why they've beefed this up a little bit right here. And that's really, that's about it.
Okay. Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
Is the applicant or representative here? Please come up to the microphone.
Hey, my name is Warren Elwell. I represent the owner.
You have anything to add, Warren?
Laura, thank you for color coding that.
She does a wonderful job at
I
that.
love my colors.
Makes my life a lot easier. I know the pond was an important thing. We were just trying to get as many trees, overstory and understory trees on site as opposed to donating to the tree fund. I don't know that I can get any more trees in there.
Yeah.
But that's, and then the golf cart path in the back, we just tried to screen some things. If you can see that top left corner, tried to screen that a little bit from where the hotel is and all of that. That's all I really have time for.
Thank you. Go ahead and open up any questions from the commissioners. Commissioner Yoda?
Yeah, maybe it's just a question for staff. I had a question about the tree fund numbers. On the left side of the drawing, it says the city tree fund, and it says 13 trees required. And on the right side, under the landscape density calcs, it says 18. And I'm wondering, is it 18? Is it 13? Is it both?
It's 13. Did that not get updated on the plan?
Well, it's what I'm just looking at on the right-hand side under the landscape density calculations. The second kind of grouping of calcs there, the bottom says parentheses 18 to be donated to tree fund
Are you talking about on the site plan?
on the landscape plan.
But on the plan, not
Yes.
the report.
Bottom right.
It's probably just an error.
Because the numbers don't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's
Maybe it just needs to be checked to see what
this is
the correct
this is
number
correct.
is.
The table is correct.
Okay. Okay. That was my only,
Yeah, we have
Sorry.
a calculator tool we use to create that table.
okay. Okay. And I just had some comments on the design. We can wait on
Okay.
that if you'd like.
Sure. Commissioner Hamner, any questions?
I drove by this the other day, and just to confirm, that 30-foot landscape buffer, I mean, that's all trees, you can't see it from the road, all that good stuff. Okay, I just wanted to confirm, just to make sure my memory was right. Cool, thank you.
Is there anything subtext to that?
I'm
or-
just
no?
trying to imagine what trees are within the landscape buffer right there, and then the way how this plan will then, especially on the
Mix.
bottom part, will mix in with
Yes.
the trees that are already there.
And a lot of those trees that are there are pine,
Yeah,
so these
Perfect.
hardwoods are
cool,
a nice enhancement.
very good, thank you.
Commissioner Chris?
I have one question for staff. So this 30-foot landscape buffer, McAllister's, I think, is just south of this property. Does McAllister's have the same platted
Yeah.
requirement?
We were just talking, I was explaining to Lydia, this entire development was developed when our ordinance required a 30-foot landscape buffer. And then a lot of the lots sat vacant, for a decade or so during the 2008 era. And now that they have, over the last 5 years, really filled in, well, our ordinance had changed since this was originally developed. And so their platting, as originally developed, vested them the right under the ordinance under which it was originally developed.
Great. Okay, yeah, I mean, as I've seen the other properties, it seems to be enough buffer. One of the sort of unrelated questions I have to what's proposed in front of us today is, should we go back and maybe clean up the pre-platted differences, that may have, an impact?
This is one of the last
It's one of the last
developable
ones?
lots in the
Okay.
city. We've got a few off of Georgian Parkway, but they were developed, or they haven't actually even been developed yet, so they would have to comply. I mean, we're,
Not nearly as
like you
much
mentioned
visibility.
earlier,
We're built out.
we're-
Okay, all right. Yeah, I have no further questions.
Okay. I'm going to come back to you for any comments.
No, I think this looks really nice. It's well done. Looks like a lot of nice additions to the population of trees that's already there. So, I think it looks fine.
Commissioner Hamner?
I really like this plan. A lot of trees, which is, hey, trees are great. you know, I was asking about the landscape buffer again because I was trying to picture the hardwoods that are kind of in the lower part of this plan and the way that they would mix in. And Robin, you took the words out of my mouth. I think it'll make a nice mixture right there as well. And obviously having the evergreens around the pond area will make that look good. The mixture of the hardwoods and some of the evergreens up on top as well, where the hotel is, that'll work really well. Basically, this is good.
Commissioner Leota.
Thank you. I do concur. I think it's a good landscape plan. I think it addresses the issues that we want to address. I just had a couple of comments on a few plants that I think probably could be moved a little bit. I'm going to use the drawing tool.
Okay.
The one maiden voyage here. The one area is these three. Whoop,
Backwards.
there we go. There's three evergreens that look like at the bottom right of the drawing that are, looks like they're immediately adjacent to what may be a riprap spillway. They probably shouldn't be in front of that. There are two trees in the top portion that are very close to the sanitary sewer and water line. They probably should find a different home, so they won't impact those utilities. And then the last one is this shade tree that's right adjacent to a light pole. So I think if those few plants got moved a little bit, I think there wouldn't be any conflicts.
Warren, are you going to be doing the installation of this? No. Okay. Then.
So I will say that the plan is drawn at 3/4 of their mature size. So like where the riprap is, the intent there is so when you turn in that space, if you're going to McAllister's and you're going to, what's their Guthrie's, to try to hide some of that so you don't see it. And it's hard to see because if it's colored, there is grass that goes down in between there, and that space on that scale of a plan is probably not visually shown very accurate. Can those be moved around? Absolutely. I just think if you turn in that space, looking at that riprap probably isn't the most appealing thing. But those certainly can be moved. The utilities in the back there, we did have that conversation about trying to make sure that it's close to the property line. And again, those graphic representation of those trees are 2/3 of their mature size. So we just want to make sure that it's not overcrowded when they grow in. And that would be something for the contractor just to be aware of those utilities, but we obviously don't want to put anything that close in any of those easements. And they can certainly be moved one way or the other. And then with the light pole.
Is that an existing light pole? I don't think it is.
No,
is
it's
it?
proposed.
Okay, so
It-
they'll
it's
have
act-
to.
There's actually a note there that pointing to it saying proposed light pole.
So they'll have to actually get a separate site lighting permit. We don't, I know lots of jurisdictions will do it all at once, but our ordinance is a little bit different. So we can, that pole may not actually ever get installed there because we do a photometric review.
So we can ensure that the shade trees won't impact the actual lighting plan.
That's why the lighting plan is separate, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say, they do make lots of adjustments in the field when they plant these.
Much to Laura's chagrin.
Understood. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. And overall, very good. With the recommendations made by Commissioner Leota, it is nice to see putting a variety as well as the hardwoods in, especially with issues with the pines. I know we've lost quite a few off of our property from pine beetle damage, and any opportunity we have to go ahead and come back in with some hardwoods or something that's going to be more resistant to whether it's insects or blight or diseases is always a good thing to keep things going. So that being said, going to go look for a motion. Do you have any?
I just have a question for Ray real quick. So is with the riprap, the juniper, they're there. Was your concern to protect that riprap, or what was the concern there for moving?
No, my concern is that you probably shouldn't put an impediment in front of where the emergency water might want to escape the basin.
Okay.
But I understand the comment about trying to screen that corner as you enter the road, and
Yeah.
it's a valid issue.
Okay. Yeah.
It may never happen. Fingers crossed it never happens, but
So it sounds like the only outstanding concern really are those two trees in the back that are closer to that water line that's back there, is that right?
yeah, it's not really good practice to plant fairly sizable trees next to water lines and sanitary sewers, because the roots will tend to gravitate to them and cause problems later. So that's the reason for that comment.
Okay.
Commissioner Hammer?
Just want to make sure we're aligned with Mr. Leota's comments. Do we want to, are we comfortable approving this with the consideration of moving those two trees?
Being considerate of where
Right.
trees are placed and around water lines.
That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, it's a good
I agree
suggestion.
with that.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so I move to approve the landscape plan for Bridge Medical at 2035 Commerce Drive, with the condition that the applicant be considerate of where trees are placed adjacent to water lines, as stated by Commissioner Leota.
Second.
Any other comments? No? Okay, all those in favor of approval with the conditions stated by Commissioner Kriz, signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, it is approved with conditions.
You ready?
Workshop.
All right.
Unfortunately, we're short
Right.
two commissioners, and I was hoping we would have a,
Well, and I'll be honest, I didn't expect you all to have a nice tidy packaged recommendation at
Well,
the end.
I actually rewrote the ordinance. Sorry.
Did you really?
Yes, I did.
I think it's a good, I'll go ahead and say this, I think it's good that you did, just to give us a good start on a baseline for this, but, yeah.
I happen to think the memo that you generated was a really good starting point for discussion, and that maybe if we looked at each one of those items and generated some comments about them, that might be a way to address, where we can go with this.
How much did you rewrite the ordinance?
Removed a section, added a new section,
Okay.
added some side setback and
Okay.
front setback and
So
things
how
such as
about,
that.
how about we start where we are? Like,
Exactly.
hey, this is the ordinance, let's talk about the things that are in there now.
Yep.
And then we go to, let's also talk about these new things. Does that
That is
work?
wonderful for me. Yes,
Okay.
that works.
With all of this keeping in mind the goal of the rewrite to begin with, is that we want to have in mind what the problem, I always say, what problems are we trying to solve? And what kinds of goals are we trying to achieve? And then how does the ordinance specifically address those big goals? The other thing I would like you all to, and I am pushing here from a professional perspective, is consider where that line is when something goes from being administrative to a policy-based decision. I said last time, 50% reduction seems way more like a policy decision than, let's say, a 10-foot type of reduction. And so that's my general emphasis. Where that line is what I hope you all will address. And then also, who should be authorized to make this administrative or ministerial decision. And as I mentioned in an email, I have been reaching out to the city attorney, asking questions on procedurally, reading the new, a couple of years ago, the zoning procedures law got updated to specifically address this quasi-judicial. And I just came across in a definition section this requirement for a 30-day legal publication. That's the only thing that's required for administrative or non-legislative or non-zoning related decisions. So basically anything that is quasi-judicial had to have this 30, and it was not in the section of the statute that addresses procedures and requirements. So, and when I asked Ted, I honestly asked him, I said, I think I'm crazy because nobody else is doing this, so I must be interpreting this statute wrong. And he said, no, you're not. In fact, we need to start doing it. So there is, whatever we end up doing will have to include this 30-day legal publication requirement to comply with the state law, which affects that one of the questions that was brought up about the timeline, 15-day versus 30-day. Well, now we know it's going to have to be at least 30 days because of the way our legal ads run. We have to get them to them Thursday before the next Wednesday that they run. So, so we have to keep that in mind.
The applicant has to pay for that, is that correct?
Well, we're going to have to talk about fees because legal ads have increased, and we are now charging $30 for administrative variance, which is supposed to cover the cost of both the staff time and the legal ad. Well, legal ads are now $30. $30. $30. So the current fees don't cover any, types of staff time. So, and that's what I just talked about there.
But ministerial, administrative.
Even any type of variance
So
now requires it.
So
Yeah.
anything doesn't matter if it's quasi-judicial or not.
Right.
There is a 30-day legal
30
notice.
day
Okay,
minimum.
got it.
Okay, so let's dive in to those devilish details. The way the ordinance has is that it's got, and I've written it here based on the heading within the section. So section A is a type of situation that would apply or would be appropriate for an administrative, and that is that the request pertains to an existing zoning setback violation, provided that the current owner or the person making the request is not the one who created the request to begin with. And we've had 2 recent cases where they gave me pause, and I just wanted to bring them to your attention. I've been doing this for 20 years, 7 years here, and each of these situation has come up just this year, and it's the first time. So I'm not saying this is a regular situation, but just something to think about. If we have a case where a new property owner is upset because their neighbor has enclosed a sunroom and it is not attractive, but the new property owner claims it was done recently. The property owner says it was actually done in the 80s when his dad owned it, and there's no permits on file. So how do you give voice to a property owner when they're concerned that by the way the current ordinance is written, they don't have a voice, it's just administrative, and they don't have notice that it's being done. They don't have to write any written consent, and it's just, basically, did it exist before? Yes, okay, sign off on it. So would it be appropriate to require proof of quality construction that there was, and whether that be a building permit, or some type of letter from a general contractor licensed general contractor saying that it meets minimum construction codes. And the reason I say the or is because as much as I love a record keeping system, I can't guarantee that the records that we have on file now for the 70s and 80s are complete. And then that also brings up the fact that there's no sign put on the property, there's no written requirement from the neighbors or an HOA, so they don't have an input. And then we also, in a different situation, had a deck that was more than 50% into the rear setback and has been since 1976. And I know for a fact back then we didn't require deck permits. So what if we have an existing encroachment that's 100%? is that an appropriate administrative variance? So those are the types of things that might want to consider. And then, forgive me, was it Mr. Leota brought up the idea that none of these specifically say that they're only residential? Yeah. And so you'll see that as a recommendation to consider changing, is adding a requirement that it be a residential use, and that these types of variances, processes shouldn't apply to non-residential properties. So those are, you guys want to talk about each one, or do you want to, I feel like if I keep going, it's just going to get me talking, and I want to hear what you guys say.
So this is the longest standing part of,
Yeah.
of what's there. If we were going to restrict it in any way, adding a residential use requirement to this, I think is very reasonable. Going further, I'm hesitant to do that because the folks that are on this committee still have to abide by the rest of the section, which, you know, they analyze the application to determine whether granting the request would cause substantial detriment to other property owners in the surrounding area. It's not that they have to just approve it because it's been there. I think the folks on that committee should be well situated enough to take these kinds of things that you're mentioning into account if they were brought forward. And I think, you know, when we talk about, you know, what's the purpose, what we're trying to solve here, you know, I'm not sure that changing this is really going to serve that purpose. I mean, think about why Councilman Holland kind of brought this forward in the first place. Increase transparency, maybe making decisions that are sort of inconsequential, so that they, you know, so that you're using this only for, yeah, everyone basically agrees this should be something that we allow. It's easier than going to the full council, right? At least that's my idea of what
And
the
it's
purpose
more,
is.
I know that this gets brought up a lot, especially even with discussion with council about having to go through the full process. It's actually about having to meet those 6 hardship criteria, which are very difficult to meet if you've got something like this. You know, it's a much higher bar, whereas these type of situations, that's why they are easier, is because they don't have to meet that hardship criteria.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we were gonna do anything here, I mean, I would think the residential use requirement is fine. We should really say that for all of this except for the parking restriction.
I agree. And Brum, let me ask a question, because going through, and I've read through all the administrative variances that you provided, and that's one of the reasons why I asked, because I did want to read through. So one of the things I did happen to see, at least 2 jurisdictions have not only administrative variance, but they have a minor administrative variance. And the minor really came into, and I think both were about the same, if it is 1 foot or less, any setback, front, side, rear. It's a very simple process. The administrator automatically has jurisdiction to go ahead and make that decision. Have we, as
The
Peachtree
30-day
City,
notice.
considered anything such as that?
I can tell you that I have had surveys showing property that have been, foundations are 6 inches over the setback, and I have elected not to bring those to city council. So, do I technically have the authority to do that? Probably not. Do I want to make somebody go through an entire process for 6 inches? I mean, that smacks of not being rational.
So, the reason I'm asking is
Do we
that
want to add
something
that?
that we
I
would
would fully
want to consider?
support that.
Yeah, totally.
Just
Yep.
go ahead and basically put in black and white the practice that we've been doing downstairs
Yeah.
would be very helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think Roswell, as well as, I can't remember if it was Peachtree Corners, there were 2 of them, I think on the north side, that had the minor, and I can pull them up, but I think there were 2 at least that had the minor administrative
And
variance.
was this for existing, or is this for, hey, if there's anything, because what I would not want to happen is eroding those setbacks 1 foot at a time. Somebody coming in for a building permit, asking for, you know, a bathroom addition, and it's shown 1 foot over the setback. I don't think staff should be approving that building permit. But we do, and have in an ordinance, we require a foundation survey. And stuff happens out in the field, and a foundation survey comes back and it shows it, you know, 9 inches, 10 inches. If we had this, you know, that's where I would hope we could, if we were to do this.
It seems to
put
me
a
like
little bit of
that's
guardrails on it.
less of a variance and more of a tolerance, right?
Yeah. And it was Johns Creek and I believe Roswell were the two that,
Okay.
I'm looking at Johns Creek right now, and that's what they have. They have the administrative variance, and then they have a minor. And just to read it, Director of Community Development, this is for Johns Creek, may grant an administrative minor variance up to 1 foot of any minimum yard requirement. Approval of an administrative variance is not guaranteed, shall require documentation of hardship, per whatever section, but it basically falls upon the planning director to go ahead and approve or deny that.
Okay.
And I'm probably the same, I would think, probably for the other jurisdiction would be very similar. So, I mean, if it's something that, you know, we're doing, then yeah, I think it's probably good practice, necessary practice to go ahead and codify it.
Yeah, if there's a way to do it without the 30-day notice period, though, it would seem like a better way to do it, like allowing
In the
a
existing, they
tolerance.
did not have the 30-day, but that
Nobody
may
does.
not, that's the problem. Now, one of the things they also had, and this is something back to notification of neighbors and things such as that, for a minor, there's no notification. It's basically, you receive it, you
Yeah.
review it, and you approve it.
The way that Robin
Yeah.
and our attorney is telling us that we're interpreting the laws, it doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, it goes to.
So let me take this to Ted and just see,
Yeah.
does it have to be, excuse me, does it have to be a zoning setback? Can it be something we put in the building chapter so that it's, you know, it's a
Yeah.
power through there and not through, I don't know.
I have some thoughts on this, the notice issue and those 4 bullets on the possible changes. I think it should be residential only. The required written support of the adjacent neighbors, I think that's a requirement because that's satisfying the negative criteria aspect of variances. If they come back and say to you, we don't have any problem with their encroachment, regardless of whatever the percentage is or whatever the footage is, then they've satisfied that
Substantial detriment.
substantial detriment criteria, and staff could then make that decision. But if you can't get that, I suggest it goes the regular variance procedure, because then it allows for mitigation once they make their hardship case. Once they come in and say, you know, this existed for a long time, we don't have building permits, I can't get a contractor to write me this letter because he's gonna be on the hook for this construction that maybe he didn't do. So then it goes the full process. They get to make their hardship case, and if there's a couple of trees that have to get planted or something, then it gets done that way, but then it's tight. You know, all the i's are dotted, all the t's are crossed, and future property owners don't have to worry about it, it's done. Whereas it's an open issue, if it just gets glossed over, it could come back later, and it always does. So that's you know, my issue on that. On the encroachment, I think for administrative approval, has to be pretty small. Has to be maybe 10% or maximum of 1 foot or something like that. It has to be pretty small, because then that's putting too much pressure on either the committee or yourself to make a decision that could come back to you later.
And that's that big question of where is that line?
Yeah.
And so you're saying it has to be
I
very
think
small
it should
line.
be small. I think it should be very defined and a small percentage, you know, maybe a maximum of 10% in every zone. And like I said about the proof of the constructability, I don't think you're ever gonna get that from a contractor. I wouldn't if I was a contractor.
And I guess I don't know, I think a little different on I think a little different on getting approval from the adjacent owners. I think it's fine, and I think it's really necessary to go ahead and send out a notification. And during that 30 days, I mean, it's basically like the FAA does. It comes back and says, here's an NPRM. You have 30 days, 60 days, 90 days to get the comments back. I think any comments that the adjacent neighbors would come back in writing to staff. And then that would go ahead and possibly
So
change your decision or make your
that
decision
might
for
help.
you.
You know, the reason the neighbor notification was brought up is the possibility of impacting relationships. If that onus was taken, because right now, the way it is, it's put on that property owner. If it's taken and put on the city to basically, we're gonna send out certified letters to the adjacent property owners, and no news is good news type of mentality, meaning if we don't receive comment within that 30-day period, then,
Then it's
then-
assumed that there's a no comment.
that
And
there's
I've-
no
No
negative
objection.
economic or substantial.
And I've been on
depreciation.
multiple HOAs. I've been the ACC person on multiple HOAs, and I've run into situations exactly where, well, your stormwater from one of your downspouts is running across your property onto mine, and what are you gonna do about it? Situations, and, you know, the neighbors weren't on very good terms because of that. So, I think sending a notification out and whatever comments either come back or don't come back, I think is good. Now, HOA approval, and again, being on the HOA, anything like that would require an HOA approval.
Yeah.
So I think you would see that, and I think that's fine to require. But requiring, you know, approval or consent from neighbors, I think that's above and beyond what really needs to be done.
Yeah, and that's what Commissioner Johnson said last time you all met. She was concerned about that aspect of getting approval from your neighbors, basically. So I mean, if we're going to add approval to this part of the ordinance, I think it should be on the city. I mean, I think you could argue that you could put that requirement on every single portion of this. The immediately adjacent property owners are provided approval from the city, and if they'd like to make a comment, they have that opportunity. If they don't want to, that's fine as well.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, it's good.
You're okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
I disagree. I
Okay.
think the adjacent property owners are paramount in terms of trying to protect their interest from any zoning that could impact them. It's the negative substantial detriment proof.
But do you think that they,
And I think they should get a letter
Mhm.
and respond to say they don't have any,
Well, they'll have that
problems with
opportunity.
it. But if they say they do, then I think that doesn't give them.
right, well then, if we do get comments, then we say it doesn't meet this criteria for
Okay.
administrative
Then it gets into a
variance.
variance.
And
So
that's
you're
right.
saying the same, yes,
Okay, I
you were
just
saying
wanted
the
to
same
make
thing.
sure that that's
Mhm.
what I heard.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's up to, I don't wanna necessarily limit the committee of folks here, because I think if someone responds, and yeah, it's negative, but it has nothing to do with whatever's the request is for the variance, just because there is a negative response, doesn't mean that it's just off the table, they gotta go through the whole
Their existing
process.
corner of their house is encroaching into the setback, but their neighbor has a stormwater problem, so
Yeah.
their comment is related to the
Yeah,
stormwater, so it has to be germane.
There has to be a nexus to
Okay.
Yeah.
what they're complaining about.
Yeah, so I still think it should be in the discretion of that committee to figure out if the negative comments are relevant, and
Okay.
then they use that in their analysis
Okay,
of the
yeah.
application.
And I guess,
Yeah.
actually, Robin, I don't want to go backwards, but actually going to the committee. Do we want to touch on that at this time? Do we want to get through?
I was actually hoping to get through these.
Okay,
to
that's why I'm asking.
understand where that line is
Okay.
before I.
That is fine with me. I just wanted, okay.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're in agreement that this should be residential,
Mhm.
that, the city can send out the notice.
Okay.
Are we, what about the maximum encroachment? Do you wanna talk about that for this section?
Well, and
I don't know if that is here or in section B.
well, in this, I was just this is, like I said, this was one situation, and out of the many years of doing this, and so I don't know if that warrants updating this ordinance. I just wanted to bring it to your attention to see what you guys thought. I mean, one out of a couple of hundred that have been done over the years, and even in that case, it was still looked at by the committee, and even though the written support wasn't required, he actually went out and got it. And so,
It could still apply to an existing condition that you're gonna rebuild. You're gonna take a deck down and
Right.
rebuild it, and
Yep.
it's over the setback line. It may apply, so I do think limiting that encroachment with respect to an administrative approval is necessary to allow for an effective approval.
okay.
You know, if it's really a lot more significant than, say, 10% of the setback requirement, then it probably should go beyond administrative approval,
Well,
in my
think,
opinion.
yeah, I think let's revisit that.
Okay.
After we go through some of the setbacks and see where things kind of fall out. And then we can say, hey, you know, if it's, like you said, over 10%, 15%, then it automatically kicks it over.
Okay,
So,
fair?
Yep.
Okay. Y'all, I operate under, if y'all aren't saying anything, I'm gonna assume it's okay, but please speak up if I'm, okay, so the next one is for any kind of, I call it a new or a proposed encroachment into the rear setback. And this is the newest condition or the newest case that was added in the 2021 update. And this is where you see the 50% maximum with the similar building materials, et cetera, and written consent. And we noted at our last meeting that that 50% is out of range when comparing to similar jurisdictions. I also wanted to bring up, I really like, there's a clause in C that says, and I'm gonna skip to it,
I put that in all of them.
okay.
Because I
that
saw the
is-
same thing.
Yeah, no other possible location, I should say, on the property that would accommodate the proposed building expansion without encroachment. I really like that. And so I brought this up here to maybe, for you all to maybe consider what's going on here,
Yeah, that's
guys.
important because that's one of the no detriment proofs.
And we recently had a case where somebody wanted to build a very large shed, 300 plus square feet shed, well into their rear setback. And there was plenty of places elsewhere on this property to put it. It's just that that's where they wanted it, and it was right next to a path. Now, the committee disapproved that, but there's nothing in the ordinance that really gave us a nice chunk to hang on.
I was surprised it was in C, but in,
Not in,
not
and
in A
that's,
or
I
B,
think, just because
or B or C, yeah.
it's one of our new ones, so,
Yeah.
It's a hardship issue, and
Yeah.
it establishes that.
okay. So
In my
you
opinion.
do like to add that?
Yes.
Okay.
So Robin, a general question. So, there's A, B, C, D. Looking at, I added another section for side setback.
Okay.
Because I added front and rear into B, and then basically created a new section C for side. Very similar, although the percentage and the maximum are less because we have much less side areas.
We do.
Much less side areas. But then I looked at the existing section, I guess D,
Okay.
if I have my lettering correct here. Is there a reason why that section was by itself? Because when I read through it, I actually incorporated that into
Okay,
sections
so
B and C.
D is the parking reduction.
Okay, so my lettering is off when I
Okay.
redid it. So the section where it says the request is for a decrease of no more than 25% of the building minimum setback. da, da, da.
Okay, so, part of that was to make the least amount of changes to the 2008 ordinance when we updated it.
Okay.
So basically, it was, hey, this was already here, let's not touch it. But council was just seeing, quite frankly, a lot of patios wanting to be enclosed for sunrooms, for offices and living spaces after COVID. And it was just, one after the other. And so that's where this B got added as a separate.
Okay.
So if you want to combine them, that's definitely something we can do.
They almost were the same, but not quite. And then I really looked and said, well, if we're going to be adjusting setback percentages, then why have this sort of redundant section? And let's go ahead and incorporate it into the existing ones that we currently have. So
And
I didn't know if there was another specific reason
Well, and
for
if you
that.
think about it, B has the potential, the way it's written now, of getting you closer to somebody's house, somebody's structure. Whereas C, the way it's written now, is there's nobody you're getting close to. It is public, undisturbed, green space. There's no consideration of fire safety or any of that stuff, so.
But I also looked at that as, should there be a differentiation between you being next to someone's house or you being next to a green space, quite honestly?
Already having green space next to you is kind of an advantage.
It is, and should we keep it the same and say, well, instead of 50%, it's say 10%, and it's 10% whether you are adjacent to publicly owned land
I can't,
or you're not.
off the top of my head, I can't remember ever processing an admin variance for C.
Because I didn't see anything like that unless I missed it in any other
Yeah.
jurisdiction. That's why I wasn't sure if there was a reason for that or not. And that's why when I kind of went through and did everything, I just got rid of it and incorporated it in.
The other reason I don't like C, quite frankly, is roads are publicly owned. And I, from an urban design perspective, have a strong opinion that front setbacks are probably one of your most important. And if you start moving your house closer and closer, or in this case, 25% closer to the street, you really stand out from the fabric or the design of your neighborhood as a whole. So I tend to, I will certainly, if you all want to talk about allowing front setback encroachments, by all means, but that's my professional opinion, is to keep them where they are and to not have that be an administrative process.
Because a big change affects the zone plan, the way the zoning has been set up, and it could have a significant impact for future development. How many other properties are like that?
Right.
You don't want to have to be asking that question. Now, there are going to be cases where you have an existing condition where homes were built
Right.
before the ordinance was updated to the current standards, and maybe all the houses on the street are too close. So that's a case that has to be made, but,
Well, and I think it also goes then to what we would be looking at and what would we be recommending as to the percentage or maximum. I would definitely not be okay with a 50% for a front setback, but would I be okay with perhaps a 10% or no more than 10 feet or 5 feet? Possibly. And that's what I looked at for really, honestly, the 50% that we have, I'll be honest, it's overly generous. It really is. I looked across everyone else's. There are a few that are 25%, 30%, but the vast majority are in the 10 to 15 with maximum maximum linear footage. And then there are a few that literally, it's like you have 2 feet, and that's it. That's all you have. And I think we can give some allowance. I put in 10% or no more than maximum of 10 feet
I agree
for
with
a
you.
rear setback, and I incorporated that into the front, although I am open to taking the front out of there and leaving that as a standard variance also.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
because
I'm good with that.
The front should be a standard variance every time.
Yeah.
It
This
should
is too
not be a
important.
part of the administrative variance.
Gone.
In my opinion.
And how
just-
does everybody feel about that 10% or 10 feet, whichever is?
That's where I was going, is like having
whichever is
Or,
less.
yes, whichever.
There has to be a
It
maximum.
depends on the zone because the setbacks are
Exactly,
different,
because
so.
we've got some that, now I like to require a minimum of a 25-foot building setback because of the parking, but we've got some stuff that was zoned that has a 20-foot setback, front setback. And so a 10-foot is 50% of that.
That's right. There's
But
quite a few of the
10%.
ordinances talk about 10% or 10-foot max, and I
Yeah.
like that language.
Yeah, and that's
Yep.
what I
But
thought.
what do
Because
you
then you
do?
compare it to the zone, if it's a 20-foot setback, it's a maximum of 2 feet
But,
at 10%,
so
because it
so
can't go to
what
10
we'd want to
feet.
say is 10% or maximum
Whichever is
10
less.
feet, comma, whichever is less.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think 10%, I mean, I get it that we were looking at a comparative analysis of between 10 and 33% in other jurisdictions. It just feels a little low to me. I mean, if you think about the amount of a buffer between properties.
But for administrative approval.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they
think it
still have
has
the
to be
opportunity
low.
to go
You can
higher
still go
with the regular
To
variance.
the regular variance.
Yeah.
If you, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
I'm fine with that.
And I like the whichever is less, I think.
Yes.
Robin, what do you think our average setback is?
Our average so if I were to take the city as a whole, so it's hard to say because a lot of the new development,
Yeah.
the front setbacks, that kind of new urban, they're much smaller, but the average residential setback is 30 feet in the front, maybe 40 feet if you're in like the smoke rise. 30 feet in the rear is most of what they are, except some of our new subdivisions are like 20 feet or some like the smaller kind of cluster homes are 10
Yeah.
feet. So 30 feet in the rear, 30 to 40 feet in the front. What is it, 7.5 feet on some of our older subdivisions on the side, and then 10 feet for the rest of them on the side.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking under 10 feet for setbacks. That's what for side.
Yeah.
That's, in my mind,
I
it
just
was.
would like to have something that says, if we are going to allow side setback, that has the ability of getting closer to somebody's house, which may not be a problem. If you're on a big lot, a couple of extra feet may not make a big difference, but if you're in Cresswin, a couple of feet is a huge difference, and it actually starts to impact our fire code. And so what we should say, if we do include side, is that we should set as long as the nearest, I'm spitballing here, I'm sorry,
The
but
building separation.
there you go, the building separation is at least 10 feet, or, because that's what we've got in Cresswin, right? Is it 10 or 12? I think we said 10 feet.
Well,
On the side?
Mm-hmm, or was it 20? No, it's,
Some of those
building
homes are pretty
separation,
close.
20.
yeah,
is a 20-foot building
20,
separation on Cresswin?
So it's usually 10
10
and
foot
10.
on each side.
It's
yeah.
10.
I think.
I don't think so.
think that is
It
I
might
think
even be
Cresswin
smaller
is,
than that.
Yeah.
I think Cresswin is 10 feet between buildings,
Five
and
on
then
each side.
every 10
Oh,
See, I
every-
thought it
lots
was-
had to be
yes,
20
I thought it
feet
was
you're
five
right,
apiece.
You're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah, every 10.
and so that's
Yeah.
where
You're
I
right.
wouldn't want us to see, honestly, to get any closer, existing structures to get any closer than 10 feet, because then that impacts the fire construction.
The way this is written right now, if anyone wants a side setback, you've got to go through the main process.
Right.
And I actually agree with that. I don't think there should be an administrative variance for a side setback that doesn't abut publicly owned property that's not a street. Right? If you want to get real specific. I think if you abut public property that's not a street,
That's a
couple
front
feet,
setback.
whatever, right?
That's a front setback.
That's not
so-
a street. That's not a street.
Oh, okay,
Okay,
sorry.
right. So I mean, and that's what I would add to C. We're not at C yet, but I think that side setbacks and front setbacks should all go through the main process.
What if it's a side setback with like the foot, like the minor one?
In certain neighborhoods, that's going to be problematic, right? Now, if it's an existing thing, they can go to Section A still and get that, right? But you know, if they want to build something new, they got to go through the main process and show a hardship.
For side.
That's my opinion, but I mean, you know, I'm open to discussing that.
I think it's a good opinion.
So we're talking about then, the only administrative approval for a setback would be at the rear.
Would be rear.
Can I say something real quick
Or
about just the
abutting public
front?
property, not a street.
I mean, you might have in your head that somebody's talking about like a big expansion to the house that would come out to the front. I have seen several permits where people are just sort of making a nicer front porch, where they've just kind of come out of, 3 to 5 feet to make their front porch just a little more grand. That might be something to consider, giving them a few feet. And not everybody's that close to the front setback, but,
I was gonna ask, do we see that often?
I've seen a handful of building permits that are
we
just
turn
doing that. I'm
down.
not saying that they were at the front setback, but it's a
Right.
possibility that it could be something like that versus if you were thinking like a house remodel that would come out,
Right now, if you want a front setback variance, you've got to go through the main
Okay.
way of getting the variance, and I don't see council changing that. Their
And
current
then
structure.
is everybody, how does everybody feel about the side? Because the public property one does apply to if somebody's side yard is against like a green belt or something. So if we were to remove C or
Restrict it to
the same percentage,
streets.
then it would be, okay.
I don't generally have an issue with the side if it's limited for administrative approval. Like the small percentages we were talking about, 10% or a maximum of 10 feet, whichever is less. Obviously, it's gonna depend.
10% is gonna be less, because there is no setback that's 100 feet.
Right, so, right.
It's always gonna be 10%.
But if, the rest of the committee feels that, that kind of a variance should go before the council and go through the regular variance process, I'm okay with that too. I mean, it's safer that way from zoning and an approval process perspective.
I'd originally thought of basically 1 to 2 feet for side setback as a maximum, but looking at if it's 5 feet each on Crestwind, now you're 3 feet into, so, yeah,
For some neighborhoods, I think that's gonna be a problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. So, to recap on B, we're gonna add the, no possible location clause. Change it from 50% to 10%. We don't even need to say the 10-foot max because there's no setback that's 100 feet. So 10%. How do we want to also do the same, certified mail notification process? Okay. Is there anything else about
And
B?
residential.
Oh, and add residential, sorry. Okay. Okay. We've already touched on C, which is, that 25% reduction of any publicly owned property. I mentioned, before, I'd love to be clear here that doesn't, add some language here that doesn't apply to a street.
Yep, I agree
If
with
you
that.
all agree. Or maybe what we say is, any setback other than a front setback, which is basically saying the same
Because
thing.
right
You
now,
might have a
it's
side.
minimum building, so it could cover
Could be any one of them, yeah.
anything.
You could have a side setback that's a street, though. Just be any,
We actually don't.
oh, really?
Yeah,
It always
the
is-
way our ordinance is
it's
written,
always the front.
if you're on a street, it's a front setback. Yeah,
Oh,
I know.
So
So
if
a
you're in a
corner
corner,
lot
you
would
have
Always
two
has
front-
two
Have two
front yards.
fronts, a side and a rear.
Mhm.
Oh, interesting. Okay, then yeah, then say, yeah.
So do we want to keep this, but keep it to 10%, or reduce it to 10% to align with the other one?
That works.
That was my thinking.
Yeah,
Still small enough that it's appropriate for administrative.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Add residential, change 10%, add certified mailing, but we're gonna keep it. Any other thoughts on C?
I'm curious if a certified mailing is appropriate when you're going 1 foot towards publicly owned property.
Well, I thought we had talked about doing that minor variance.
If we develop a minor variance, that covers that 1 foot, that you don't have to do any notification.
Well, we still
Well,
have
I
to
mean, I'm sorry.
publish, but we don't have to write
You still
certified
have to,
mail.
but you don't have to do it, correct.
Yeah,
correct.
so 1 to 2 feet towards, we'll say more than 1 foot, less than 10%, whatever that happens to be, towards publicly owned property. You know, do you really need the other adjoining neighbors to say, yeah, even though they're not on that side of your property?
Well, they could be in the back and you're doing a side, right?
Well, and the way that we've been interpreting the current ordinance is if you qualify, for example, if it's an existing encroachment, we use that, clause. If it's a rear setback, if it's an existing rear setback encroachment, we still use the existing clause, we don't use the rear setback one. So what I'm saying is that if somebody next to city-owned property asked to encroach 1 foot, we wouldn't make them go through C, we'd have them go through this new minor variance process.
Yeah, totally. But if it happens to be a little bit more, do they still need to get their neighbors that aren't, right, the city, of Peachtree City?
Well, and I know that says written consent, but we're doing the certified mailing.
Yeah.
Which is,
I mean, it's really in the weeds, so.
An adjacent,
You guys don't want-
well,
and that's true, and keep in mind, I can't think of any time we've ever even used C.
Okay. I mean, no one's going to object, so I think it's fine. Just leave the city notification.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did we decide this is redundant or not redundant?
Well, now it does sound like it's redundant, because if it's still if it's 10%,
But
it
so
doesn't
it's-
matter who's next to you.
This is allowing a side setback that
Correct.
wouldn't normally be allowed if you're next to publicly owned property.
Gotcha.
And that was the change when I added the side setback section. That's why I was able to go ahead and take that out.
Thanks for
But
keeping me clear.
but now we're, yeah.
Okay.
So we're gonna have to keep it.
There you go.
Yep.
I figured since nobody else brought it up, there was a reason. We kept it.
Yeah, that's right. Now, D is actually one of our favorites in staff. We feel like reducing parking, nobody knows better how to run their business than the business owner. And so if an industrial site says, we don't need all that parking, why, as the city, would we tell them they have to build it if by not building it, it improves our stormwater system and our heat runoff and just adds to our natural environment? Because the way that this one is written, they still have to identify that if they are, in fact, become underparked, they have the ability to build that reduced parking on the property. They're not just getting reduced parking because they don't have enough room for it. They have to have enough room for it in the future. Because that's what I would imagine, is that you get somebody who reduces their parking and now all of a sudden all their employees park on the public street. Well, that ain't cutting it. What we would do, the way the ordinance is currently written, is if that happens, we go to that property owner and say, remember that administrative variance you got for that parking? Well, you have to now build it because you can't keep parking your trucks and everything on it.
Did we do something like that with SMC3, where they had additional parking and then that became the park and walkway sort of?
But then they turned around and actually built it.
Right.
Because it was an issue with their neighbors. So, yeah.
I would suggest giving you some ammunition to make that administrative decision by requesting a parking study that shows that the reduced parking is supported by data, like here's how many employees we have, here's how many shifts we have, here's what we're gonna need on a daily basis, and we're only gonna exceed that need number by a few spaces. Then you have a document that you can then go back to them and say, well, this is what you said, but now you're parking everybody on the street too. You can require that additional parking based on the sketch to be built. It gives you ammunition.
I appreciate that. We can do that. I'll tell you though, staff is going to make them build that parking whether we have that study or not. So, when,
No, I mean, to make the administrative decision.
oh, to help with that, okay.
It would help you to support your decision.
So you don't run into that situation where you make them build it again, hopefully.
They just provide the work behind
Yeah.
saying,
Mhm.
we don't need all these spaces.
Is this 25, so I agree. Right?
Or would that cancel out the need for them to have the space if they needed it in the future, if they provided
I
the
don't-
data?
I have to say, I'm nervous about getting rid of that clause that says that they need to be able to show it on their site or be able to put it on their site in the future if needed. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no,
Yeah.
we're not removing that.
I think she's,
Well, yeah, I was just,
yeah,
I think they
what if?
definitely need to still show it, yeah.
Yeah.
We're just not urban enough.
But the business has changed, so
That's true.
maybe it's good fortune that their business booms and they need more parking because they have a lot more employees. That's great.
Well, and that was something that I noticed in a couple of the others, that they actually have both a decrease and an increase. Have
So we
we ever
have an
thought about that?
ordinance that allows a maximum of 125%
Okay,
increase already.
so we already have that
So
incorporated.
we have the 25% increase. This is the 25%
Okay,
decrease.
Perfect, excellent.
Everybody okay with that? 25% number works with everybody, not,
And are we good with having a parking study? as
I
well?
can, we say study, and I think it should be a
More like
parking
just
generation memo.
parking
Which
data.
is,
Yeah.
I mean,
Parking data, yeah.
Parking
good
data.
grief, I could pull up that off of
And
ITE or
I
something.
think it should be from a traffic engineer who's certified to generate that kind of data. I mean, we saw some stuff today that the attorney generated on noise, and he's not a noise expert.
But parking generation, there's sort of a standard number, industry-wide number that's used by ITE. So, I mean, I can go look that up, but
Right. But
I will come up with a nice
Each
amendment.
business is a little bit different, and you're right, there are standards, but, to ask for a reduction, I would suggest that they show that their business uniquely doesn't need this many spaces.
Okay.
I think it's a good idea, just at least them showing the work that, yes, we can be okay with
Yeah.
less spaces. So that way it's not just you taking their word for it.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
25% enough based upon the
I'll
requests
tell
that
you,
you've gotten?
the problem that we're having now is, we need more than the 25%.
Really?
And so, but it's only for medical and banks.
To reduce by more than 25%?
No, to increase.
Increase.
To increase.
Which is not part of the administrative variance process. That is built into our ordinance right now. But that 125% max, I love it because it was written during the age of big box and the sea of parking that nobody loves. But now with medical, it is run so different today than it was 20 years ago. And Piedmont will not even consider property unless they can do 6 parking spaces per 1,000, which is way more than what we require for office right now. We do 3.5 per 1,000.
My physician's at Piedmont Physicians, and there are times where I go over there and there are literally no parking spots,
Yeah.
even the lot in the back. You
Yeah,
gotta sit and
'cause
wait till somebody pulls out and
The
then.
Piedmont Physicians on 54
Yep.
West,
Yep.
that's at 4 per 1,000.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the doctors are moving out. They're going over to Noonan and Sharpsburg where all that stuff is being built. So, for us to stay competitive. But that is also not in the administrative variance section and something that staff is gonna be bringing up to council in the future.
Good.
That and you guys mentioned, totally different subject, but the UDO/ordinance revisions, not just medical, but redevelopment. We have a crazy situation where a bank is redeveloping into a bank, and the parking that they have now exceeds 125%. They want to provide less parking, but they actually need a variance to provide more parking than our ordinance requires. So that's something to think about. We've been talking about, but that's a rabbit hole. Sorry.
So, Robin, what you're saying is if somebody came in and they wanted 130%, they really just have to go for a variance? Okay. So be it.
So, the last one is E, and this is the fence. From staff perspective, we're not having an issue with this ordinance. I know that there was some discussion about increasing it, you know, whether we change it to 2 feet versus 25%. I don't know if that's a huge,
This honestly was one of the most confusing and at times convoluted to go through and actually look at the requirements from a residential to a commercial, and then you kick into the pool and
talk to Beverly downstairs.
tennis courts,
That's
and
why.
I
Queen of
started
fences.
doing these strings to
Mhm.
try to figure out how everything interconnects. Yeah, I was following, okay, residential, you're allowed 6 feet, but it can go up to 7 feet.
Oh,
And then if you go ahead and do a pool, it has to then follow the pool requirements from the International Section G, which then says, well, okay, well, that's great, but then it comes and says, again, you have to have a maximum of then 8 feet. So, or 10 feet. So it gets, and then is that 25% on top of that 10 feet, which then can increase it to 12 and a half. It gets really,
right.
yes.
And then you put into, you talked about the pool stuff, but the way the pool, international pool fences are written, it is possible, the way our fence ordinance is written, to comply with a pool security fence, and our front fence setbacks, but you have to have a custom fence made. Or for half the cost, you can buy this 5-foot aluminum fence, which, by the way, is still not cheap. It's still like, $7,000 for putting it around your fence. But, which is why this type of ordinance helps those unique situations. There are few corner lots that have pools who want fences that are technically in the front setback, and therefore they want 5 feet instead of 4 feet to comply with the building, So that's why I'm saying we don't, from staff's perspective, I don't know if we want to spend the time beating this one up.
The only other thing I had was some of the wording in that section. It's linking to just chapter section 18. But again, that not only covers normal fencing, Article 4 fencing, but also pool fencing of Article 14 and Article 13.
Right, but that one is when it's justified for topographic reasons,
Right.
not for pools.
Yeah, because then you start getting into, section 18, 165 and 166, and it starts going every which direction. So that's where like I said, you get in the weeds really quick for something that seems very benign.
We haven't had a fence person ask to go more than 6 feet because of topographic reasons in the 7 years
That's
I've been
good
here.
Then we won't worry about it if that's the case. Yeah, I started getting into it, and it was, this is actually more confusing and detailed than any of the other sections, honestly.
about it.
So,
Should this one also be limited to residential, or do you get commercial requests for this?
Well, our commercial fencing is much more liberal, and we did have one, Certainteed wanted.
With the higher fence.
And they went through the variance process, and, I don't know if we need to hold ordinance for that
Right.
one situation.
in
It
such,
can go through the regular.
in such it goes, is the
Yeah,
section
the
18, section 18 covers everything for fencing, so.
Okay, so hearing no objection. So the other things that we need to talk about, we've already mentioned the 30-day publication requirement, no matter who makes the decision, whether it's a committee or an individual. And so let's talk about that committee and what are y'all's, I'm gonna let you guys lead that discussion. What are your thoughts on the committee versus an individual, or the committee makeup, et cetera?
I'm fine with the existing committee for the standard administrative variance. And I think the big part, and I marked it here, was the city council member being rotating. And I know that was a concern at some point. So with that rotating council member, that just provides another, I guess,
that
fresh set of
doesn't-
eyes sort of thing.
That's a
perhaps?
policy,
Yeah.
that's not an ordinance.
Yeah. Right.
But I like, you know, that's worked very well.
And again, 3 of the 5 members of city council had no problem with it.
Right.
It worked for them.
Okay.
Yeah, since it said a member of city council, I think, did it have said, I think it did.
It
That's
did.
why I just put in parentheses,
Yeah.
rotating
Rotating,
member.
mhm.
So then it actually puts it into, even it's a policy, it still puts it into the ordinance.
Planning director, city manager, and city council.
Rotating. So
And I understand where there was, you know, I know Suzanne came out and wanted more of a true multi-level check and balance, and that's great. But I think it becomes a bit too, I don't want to say bureaucratic, but it does. And I think having the 3-person committee, where you're able to go ahead and have someone who's very familiar with it, then you have, you know, the city manager, and then you have that rotating council member. I think that provides that check and balance across, at least in my opinion, across that committee.
Okay. I'm seeing nodding heads.
I agree completely.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with the way it works right now. It seems
Do you want the 1-foot minor variance to be planning director? Or, you know, what other thought I
That's a
thought
good
about is
question, actually.
city manager or his or her designee, which then they
the
could
1
do
foot.
the decision-making, or they could designate the planning director to make the decision for a 1-foot. If the concern is that there's something, I don't know, that there's not an
Is
arm's
there-
length.
If you have the city manager or designee, like, does that, what additional benefit does that
I
open up?
don't know. It's, you know, it's,
He could pass it off to Robin.
or if they don't have confidence in their planning director, then they can do it. I mean, that's,
you still have
which
to
if you don't have
do-
confidence in your planning
you still
director to
have to
make
do
a
the-
1-foot decision,
If
then,
it's a variance, you still have to do the 30-day
Yep.
publication.
Mhm.
You
Yep.
still have got to make the meeting open.
Mhm.
So, to me, it's like, why bother?
Just keep it as a
the way
committee.
Just keep it.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
okay. Okay, well, we've made it through the existing ordinance. Were there things that you wanted to bring up that we haven't already talked about?
No, I think the only thing that I had, like I said, was the front and rear, and
side.
understand and agree on
Okay.
that. And then, like I said, several other jurisdictions had side. And my concern was exactly the close proximity. And if we want to keep that as a regular variance, I'm good with that too. So I think that's everything that I had.
Okay. Well, procedurally, would you all like staff, staff of me, to, because we're closing in on the end. What do we have, about 2 more weeks of Lydia's tenure with the city, before she says goodbye. But, so you'd like us to revise the ordinance and bring it back for final comment review? I was thinking if we do that we wouldn't have a workshop quite as long as we've had tonight, that it would be more of, hey, staff isn't gonna say anything unless you guys say, I wanna talk about X, Y, and Z.
If you're able to draft up the revised
Mhm.
and be able to send that out,
Mm-hmm, Yep.
and we'll be able to review it
okay,
in between now and the next. Hopefully, if there were any questions, I wouldn't think there
I
would
mean,
be any major, and then when we come back, if there are any changes or
Yep.
modifications to it, if everyone's good, we're
Yep.
good.
Yeah.
That works.
That's fine.
okay.
Yeah.
And then that would mean our, next August meeting, we can talk about this. We will not be able to hold a short-term rental ordinance public hearing, but, we could have a workshop on it. And/or do you want to talk about, information on the upcoming presentation to city council? Do you want to have a discussion as a group on that presentation? An issues identification session.
So can you remind me if you don't, so, because we're switching topics now.
Yes, we are.
Okay, so where are we at in the, is it the short-term rental stuff has come to us a couple of times?
Yeah.
And it's gone to council a bunch of times too. So where are we at now with that?
We're starting the discussion over
So
again.
we're starting from scratch.
I mean, we're not really it's been a while too, so forgive me if,
Yeah.
you know, 14-hour day, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that we were going to start with the most recent draft
Mhm.
and kind of go from there, but that nothing was totally in stone, that if you wanted to make changes and what do you, I'm seeing, Ken, you have a better handle on this, because what do you remember?
I
Council
mean,
tabled it.
yeah, I felt like we had passed this off and it went to city council.
And they said no. They turned
said
it down.
no.
Yeah, they denied it in December.
Okay,
And then they wanted to have a committee, but then we had a change in city management and couldn't get, you know, and then not everybody on council even really wanted the committee because they felt like we'd heard a lot. And
Sure.
a lot of the same things. And so but they want something. And so I was thinking that instead of recreating the wheel, that we would start with our most recent draft and identify.
did they say why they didn't?
Was it too restrictive?
It, without putting words in anybody's mouth, I would say half of the council thought it was too restrictive and half thought it wasn't restrictive enough. And so we're, right. So I guess my point is, maybe next meeting isn't the right meeting to have that short-term rental discussion.
No.
Well, so, cause we already made, I mean, this exact commission group made recommendation
Uh-huh.
on the short-term rentals. Maybe what we do is we just look at that recommendation and say, do we
Still support it.
agree with
Okay.
the
We
previous
do
recommendation?
have to go
That's
through the
it.
public hearing process, though.
To do that?
Yeah, we have to, because
Okay.
it's a land use associated, so it has to go through zoning procedures.
Okay.
So it does have to come to you guys before it goes to council.
And I know that went through council. I mean, would we be able to get a synopsis do we have a synopsis of their concerns, their thinking? As you said, you know, quote unquote, not unquote, but half the council may have thought it to be, I mean, was there any other discussion as to what?
Let me review my notes and the public hearing where the council
And this
talked
was,
about it.
sorry to interrupt, and this was last December they said no to
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
And now we have new council members.
Yep, right,
Yep.
right.
Okay.
So what we could do is just bring back the version that you all said, talk through those details, see if there's any revisions that you want to make, hold the public hearing, listen to what they say, and then we could either, you guys can say, we're good, move it on to council, or we could have another workshop on it.
So it'll be workshop, public hearing, potential second workshop.
Well, I wasn't thinking about having the workshop before the public hearing.
We would have to do public hearing.
So public hearing,
Yeah.
then a potential
Then
workshop. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
So, in order for us to have a public hearing, we have to have that, required notice, which, was last Thursday in order to make
The next one.
your next, so it'll have to
Yeah,
be
so
the
2
second
meetings.
meeting in August.
We could do it then.
Yeah, just do it
And then we
then.
could do ours.
Yeah, so I think then if that's the case, I would like to have, and Kenneth, probably a discussion on whether we call it a UDO, whether we call it whatever it is.
Architectural guidelines, yeah.
Is to kind of bring everyone in and get your thoughts and input, and, because we're gonna be going in front of council as of right now.
September 5th.
September 5th?
Yes,
Yeah.
and just to set expectations, we're not talking specifics
Correct.
about it. We're just talking about, like, these are thoughts that we have about the current architectural guidelines within the city, the pros and cons associated with it, and steps that we are recommending to city council that they consider for us to then get in the weeds on these.
So you were saying architectural guidelines, but then councilperson brought up golf cart parking, electric golf, that's not really architectural. So do you want to talk about maybe overlay?
Yeah,
Which
overlay,
can be
that's fine.
architectural
It's going to be more
and-
encompassing than architectural.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
think. I
that's-
mean,
that's fair.
it is. It is. It's, again, without calling it a UDO,
Uh-huh.
it's probably going to be as close to that as.
Yeah, we've called it several things.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, but honestly, it's probably going to be a UDO. I mean, unless council comes back and says they do not want that.
Okay.
But it seems, again, we're
Maybe
somewhat.
it's a focused UDO, because
Yeah, sure.
a UDO is a huge
Yeah.
process. But, okay,
Well,
so you're just saying,
I
let's
guess-
have this
if-
conversation.
Right,
Okay,
and I
fair
guess
enough.
if
I don't
council
wanna
comes
limit that,
back
yeah.
and says, because I know a couple council members said, hey, you know, we need the UDO, and that's what we would
Okay.
like to see.
Mhm.
And if that's the direction of council, then that now becomes something different. It takes it to the next level, I think.
Okay, so at
Possibly.
our
Yeah,
next.
no, you're right.
At the first August meeting, then, we would have a workshop on just general ordinance needs discussion, is how I would put it on the agenda, so that folks.
And one of the
public
things
know.
I actually brought
Okay.
up to Justin earlier was, you know, I was reading some articles, and the city of Milton it has a new requirement, and it actually came from their fire department for fire blankets next to commercial chargers for EVs.
Uh-huh.
And the reason why is that EV lithium battery fires now take between 30 to 50,000 gallons, if my memory is correct, to put out a fire. It's not 5,000 to 6,000 gallons of a typical car.
Wow.
And we would probably stress, and me not being a fire person, that would probably stress our infrastructure as well as whatever capabilities our fire department had to put 50 to 60,000 gallons on a single car, and you have multiple chargers. There could be multiple cars. So Milton is requiring fire blankets. And that's not something the fire department, they can make a recommendation from what Justin said. Now, would that now become part of an ordinance?
So,
I don't know.
we have the ability to, we could tackle this through zoning and development, or you could tackle it through the building code. And the state does allow jurisdictions to have more restrictive building codes.
Right.
And so the fire marshal could do it through that way. It would be, I think that's how I would, if it were just fire blankets that we were talking about, that's how I would kind of approach it.
And I think it
But
goes to chargers, to.
where do they, how many do we require?
Where
do
should they
get
be
placed?
located?
What do they look like?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So-
That's more in our lane.
And
Yeah.
that would be, I looked at that as being a sub-part of that, is that if you
Mhm.
put one in, it's required now that you have a fire blanket for each charger,
Okay.
sort of thing, so.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
So in our next meeting, we'll have a discussion of what we want for the ordinances just generally.
And I would think of
Is
it
that
as
right?
sort of a starting discussion, and then if you want to continue that discussion at your second August meeting, you still have the time before your September 5th presentation. And I'm happy to, I think I might have sent out my very unofficial wish list that I
You did, you
started
did.
creating when I was senior planner here, and it has not been updated. I don't do those plan reviews anymore, but that's kind of a starting place that you guys can say, don't care, ooh, that's a good one, ooh, I hadn't thought of that, or those kinds of things. I could include that in your packet for your next meeting as just a jumping off
Yeah.
part.
Good.
Okay.
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 So our
that's
next
all.
meeting is August
12.
12th?
August 12th.
Okay.
Cool. And that would be a workshop then?
Yep.
Yes,
Right?
sir.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Good. Okay.
All right.
Anything else?
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion to adjourn passed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your time.
Yeah.
Commissioner, thank you.